Seats, please. I'd like to call to order the Board of Education meetings, CUSD 201. Today is Tuesday, March 5th, 2013. Roll call, please, Mrs. McMahon.
Mr. Armstrong?
Here.
Ms. Caparelli?
Here.
Mr. Charleston?
Here.
Mrs. Charlton?
Here.
Mrs. Hancock?
Here.
Mr. Price?
Here.
Mrs. Thomas?
Here. We could stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, please.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, the first item on the agenda, approval of minutes. The chair will entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the January 22nd, 2013 regular meeting of the Board of Education as presented.
So moved. So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And I abstain.
So do I.
The chair will entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the closed session of the January 22nd, 2013 regular meeting of the Board of Education as presented.
So moved.
Second.
All approved?
Aye.
Aye. Aye. Aye.
And I abstain.
And I abstain. The chair will entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the February 12th, 2013 regular meeting of the Board of Education as presented.
So moved.
Second.
I just had one comment on that. The adjournment time, I think Judy needs to be adjusted on that one. I think we got out of closed at 10:15.
You're talking the closed minutes?
Well, on the regular minutes, it shows 10:05.
The very end.
It's the closed. Wait, hold on a second.
It
Let me
says in
go
the regular
back.
minutes, Mr. Carey and Mrs. Anderson left closed session, so it's a different time frame. It says 10:15 at the bottom.
And then it says 9:55 after that.
Oh, okay.
It's not the closed session, it's the regular.
But it's the
meeting.
regular one. Okay, sorry. So because of adjournment, okay. Okay, then as amended.
So moved.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. The chair will entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the closed session of the February 12th, 2013 regular meeting of the Board of Education as presented.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, are there any public comments? Okay.
I have a question on that, sorry.
Oh,
This is my first time on one of these. We're
Could
supposed
you-
to fill one of these out before you guys start, and then when the time comes.
there'll be a public comment at the end of the meeting, so you can talk then,
Okay,
if you want.
I think that'd probably work better.
Okay, then you can go ahead and fill that out, and then why don't you hand it to Mr. Armstrong, and it'll
We'll
make its
pass
way
it.
around.
Okay.
Okay, next item on the agenda is the consent agenda. Any questions?
Are we supposed to talk about the 2013-14 calendar?
Is there a choice?
Well,
There's an
it-
option.
Two options.
Well, oh, that, okay, the
B was
suggestion is for B.
Okay.
Right, the committee always wants the board to C2, but then they also offer their recommendation is B,
Yep.
but it's the board's, decision.
Okay. Okay, then the chair will entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented. Number 1, personnel recommendations. 2, approval of student tour requests. 3, approval of 2013-2014 school calendar. And while we're there, so Mr. Carey said you will get this posted in the next couple of days.
Right.
But the first day of school that school begins is August 21st, with the tentative then close, and last day of school attended is May 30th, unless there's any snow days. Okay, I know a lot of people have been asking that question. Number 4, resolution to dispose of district equipment. 5, renewal of medical, dental, life, and long-term disability insurance plans. 6, abatement of working cash funds. 7, approval of February 2013 expenditure report. 8, ratification of January 2013 regular payroll.
So moved.
Second.
And roll call, please, Mrs. McMahon?
Mr. Armstrong?
Yes.
Ms. Caparelli?
Yes.
Mr. Charleston?
Yes.
Mrs. Charlton?
Yes.
Mrs. Hancock?
Yes.
Mr. Price?
Yes.
Mrs. Thomas?
Yes.
Okay, and then because of the second snow meeting we're having here, we're going to take the information on the annual report on library programs and have those presented at our meeting on the 19th, March 19th. And then, because we're gonna move things around a little bit, we're going to have the first discussion item from our TIF district, and if our attorney, Mr. Dean Crone, would come on up and talk with us about that. Thank you for coming.
Pleasure. Good evening. I brought some extra copies of my outline, so with your permission, I'll give them to the people in the audience, so it'll make it easier for them to follow along. Well, we're here tonight to talk about one of my favorite subjects, tax increment financing. Before we get to the outline, let me just tell you a little bit about myself. Most of my work over the last 25 years has been on behalf of municipalities. I'm really more of a village attorney than I am a school district attorney. However, for the last 10 years, I have represented a number of school districts in connection with the issue of TIF. Let me just say that tax increment financing as a tool for economic development is a brilliant invention and can be extraordinarily effective in the right spot. And the question then becomes whether it's being proposed for the right kind of spot or not, and whether, if it's not the right spot or the kind of spot that was anticipated by the legislature when it was authorized, what a school district or other taxing body might do in order to try to mitigate the adverse impact that a TIF district can have on a school district or another taxing body. Okay? So I'm going to walk through this outline, and I'm happy to answer questions either as we go along or at the end of the outline, as you may prefer. I thought I'd put the goals, as I see them, of a school district right at the top of the outline when you are dealing with a proposed TIF district like the one here in Westmont. It seems to me that you need to first determine whether this proposed TIF district will adversely affect your district, and if so, what you can do to prevent that or limit it or reduce the adverse impact. And most often what I have seen is a district negotiating an agreement with the village or city to try to accomplish that second goal. So let me start then by talking about how a TIF district works. How does tax increment financing work? And in order to do that, I'd like you to imagine a really blighted area. You know, vacant buildings, deteriorating, no traffic, no productive use, low equalized assessed value. Let's think in terms of a square block. And maybe it's an abandoned factory, maybe it's some apartment buildings that have been vacant for years, terrible condition, not a lot of traffic in the area, the kind of place where no private investor would want to risk investing money to redevelop that block unless there was some special reason why it might make sense. And under those circumstances, the city or village where that block is located might create a TIF district for that block in order to persuade private investors to redevelop that in a public-private partnership with the city or the village. So how would that work? Well, the city or village would designate that block as a tax increment financing district. And at the point at which that is done, the assessed value, the EAV, for all of the properties within that TIF district would then be frozen at that current level for purposes of generating taxes for all of the taxing bodies that normally receive property taxes from those properties. Okay, so let's assume, just for sake of argument, that the total EAV for that block on the day that the TIF district is created is $1 million. Okay? Just arbitrarily. Nice, easy number to remember. And then the city or village goes to a private developer and proposes that the developer come in and redevelop that block, tear down those buildings, and build a new shopping center. And convinces the developer that there really would be business if they did that there are enough people that live within a certain distance from that block who would come and shop in that shopping center, and that it makes sense. And the city or village agrees to reduce the cost to the developer of doing that by agreeing to pay some of the costs of redevelopment. And the way that would work is that either the developer would front all of the money, and the city would enter into a redevelopment agreement with the developer, agreeing to reimburse the developer over time with the TIF revenue that the city will receive from those properties. Okay, and we're going to talk about how that money comes to the city. Or if the developer can't afford to put all the money up front, the city might then borrow money by issuing bonds to pay for some of the costs of redevelopment, and would plan to pay the interest and principal on those bonds over time with the TIF revenue that it would be receiving. Well, okay, what is this TIF revenue? Where does this come from? Well, we said that on the day that the TIF district was created, the total EAV within that block was $1 million, okay? But now the city enters into an agreement with this developer. The developer comes in, tears all the buildings down, builds a new shopping center. And people start coming to the shopping center and shopping there, okay? What happens to the EAV when that happens? Well, instead of old, vacant, blighted buildings, you've got a new shopping center on the property. So the assessed value of that block goes from $1 million to maybe $5 million or $10 million, right? It goes up. Because it's a TIF district, when the EAV goes from $1 million to $5 million, okay? Taxes are generated by the 4 million new EAV, the 4 million increase in EAV. Call it the incremental EAV, as opposed to the base EAV, okay? What happens when the EAV goes up is that the county, which determines the rate for each taxing body, okay, takes this district's tax levy, the school district's tax levy, wherever it is, and the park district, and the county's tax levy, and the township, and the community college, all of those local taxing bodies, and it spreads the levies over all of the, I'll call it accessible EAV, and determines a rate for each of those taxing bodies, right? You levy taxes every year. You send your levy to the county takes that levy and it spreads it over all of the taxable properties within your district. And it calculates a rate for your district. And then it takes that rate and it multiplies it times the EAV for each parcel within your district, each taxable parcel, okay? So the county will still do that, but when it spreads the school district's levy over the properties within this city, wherever we are, it will include the first million because that's accessible. That's still being used to provide property taxes for the school district and the county and the township and so on. But it will not spread the levy over the incremental 4 million, okay? And it'll compute a rate. But after it does that, it takes that rate and it comes back and it applies that rate to the 4 million in incremental EAV, and it generates an amount of taxes, because taxes equals rate times EAV, okay? And it does it for every taxing body in that area. And the owners of that property have to pay those additional taxes. They don't get a tax holiday because it's a TIF district. They still have to pay taxes on that $4 million in incremental EAV. But the taxes, the incremental taxes, don't go to all the taxing bodies. The incremental taxes that are generated go to the city. They go into the TIF fund that the city or the village has. And the city or village then gets to use that money to pay for some of the costs of redevelopment. So if the thing started when the city entered into an agreement with the developer and the city agreed to repay the developer over time as money became available, the city would start getting incremental taxes that goes into the TIF fund from that $4 million in incremental EAV, and it would start paying the developer back, okay? If instead the city had issued bonds and borrowed the money to pay some of those costs, well, the city would then take that TIF revenue and make the payments on the bonds every year. And by the way, a TIF district typically is established for 23 years. That's the longest that you can establish a TIF district under Illinois law, at least initially. There's a provision in the bond statute to increase the length of the TIF at some point under certain circumstances to 35 years. The reason 23 years was chosen was because the legislature figured, well, it might take a couple of years to put a deal together to get redevelopment started. And then if they have to issue bonds, bonds are often issued for 20 years. So you get your 23-year period, okay? So that's how TIF works. And when I say that the city can use the TIF money to pay off some of the costs of redevelopment, the statute is very specific about what can be an eligible TIF cost payable out of TIF dollars and what can't. So land acquisition can be paid for with TIF money. Infrastructure improvements, roads, sewers, water lines, all that good stuff, that can be paid for with TIF money. New private buildings cannot. The cost of the buildings that are built, the new buildings that are built on that site, cannot be paid out of TIF revenue. That has to come from the private partner. Okay? Okay.
So if I may, just
Yeah.
a couple things, and I'll sort of summarize a couple other points you didn't touch. So we're a tax cap district, which means that obviously our levy drives our tax base and drives into, the tax rate is an output, not an input, in a tax cap district, yes?
Yes, you determine the levy.
Yeah, so the levy is the levy and it gets spread over existing base.
Yes?
So in your example, the year before a TIF gets in place, there's $1 million EAV that our levy gets applied to. In a TIF situation, clearly the million would be preserved. But in a redevelopment situation where you got a new $5 million EAV development, $4 million of new EAV would create additional taxes. And let's use that tax number just as, create a tax number just for fun. Let's say that the $1 million creates $5,000 a year in total taxes. Generally speaking, in our experience, in 201 and in this taxing body, thing where we're at, about 70% of that tax bill inures to us. So of the $5,000 that are paid on existing EAV, $3,500 of that comes to us. by consenting to the TIF, well, first off, let's pretend for a second that we didn't need a TIF. The developer just saw a block of property that he could build a really nice shopping center on, and he had enough density and people and everything, and he was, he just had a development plan for a great shopping center, minus the TIF. Created this shopping center and created $5 million of EAV. For the district, in that scenario, without the TIF in place, we would effectively benefit. That $4 million is what's to us is called new growth, right? So that's all just new tax money over and above our levy, over and above our
Yes,
existing
and
levy.
exempt from the tax cap, by the way.
And exempt from the tax cap. That's that new growth, and that's a powerful, powerful animal to us, right? So with the new growth money, in that example, and using the same sort of numbers, the new growth money in that case to the district, at 5,000 goes to 25,000, so it's 20,000 at 70% is another $14,000 a year in new revenue to the school district if you don't have a TIF.
Right.
So by creating the TIF, or assenting to the TIF, we would effectively be giving up, in your example, in the example, call it $14,000 a year in new tax money for a period of nearly 23 years, or 20 years, call it. 20 years. 14,000 for 20 years. So effectively, that money, that TIF money that's funding new development in our taxing jurisdiction, 70% of that new money that's funding the development is coming from us. It's coming from us.
Right.
The question becomes, and I know you're going to get to it, which is how do we get benefits, from that, one way or the other? Do we? Are there things we can talk about where we can benefit from having contributed a lot of, project-based stuff that can create new revenue? Because that's really what we're giving up, in my opinion, in the TIF conversation, is the new growth revenue.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, you have described one of the potential problems with TIF, because your assumption was, in your hypothetical,
Yep.
that the developer would have redeveloped that block even if there hadn't been a TIF district created, okay? And that's always a concern. And actually, that leads into the next section on my outline, which is number 3. Because I think I have sort of finished describing how TIF works. And if anybody has any other questions about that, I'd be happy to try and answer them. But that leads us to ask the question, when can TIF be used under the statute? And the answer to that is when 2 tests are satisfied, generally speaking. I mean, it's a very long statute, but boiled down to a simple answer, it's when 2 tests are satisfied. And the second part of the second test, test 2, as I listed on my outline, which is frequently referred to as the but-for test, is in some ways even more important than the first test. The first test talks about the factors that are identified in the statute which demonstrate blighting. Remember, my hypothetical was that this was a really blighted area, really terrible, vacant buildings. Well, blight is one of those things where maybe you feel like you know it when you see it, but the legislature couldn't put that into the statute. So instead, the legislature identified 13 blighting factors and provided definitions for each one of them, and said that in a particular area, if you want to make a TIF district there and you think it's blighted, you have to be able to demonstrate that at least 5 of those blighting factors exist in that area. And there are things like deterioration and dilapidation and obsolescence and inadequate utilities and, you know, stuff that you might think of if you were trying to define blight. Or there's an alternative way to qualify, which is if an area is older and is sort of tending toward blight, it's going to be blighted if you don't do anything to stop it, then the legislature said, well, that'll qualify not as a blighted area, but as what they call a conservation area, where most of the buildings have to be at least 35 years old or older, and instead of 5 blighting factors or more, you have to be able to demonstrate that there are at least 3 blighting factors, okay? So it becomes a kind of a complicated process of analysis. And it becomes even more complicated when instead of one parcel, I mean, I was sort of hypothesizing one block that was sort of a unit, you know, one large parcel. But oftentimes TIF districts are proposed in areas where instead of one parcel or 10 parcels, there are hundreds of parcels. And that's actually what you're going to have to deal with here. So the first test is this a blighted area, or is it a quote-unquote conservation area which is tending toward blight? And so the statute would allow that to become a TIF area, but only if the second test is satisfied. And the second test...
So indeed, Dean, in our case, the CBD TIF being proposed by Westmont is being proposed on the basis of a conservation area, is that correct?
Yes, it is.
Okay, thank
If
you.
you read their draft eligibility report, that's what it'll tell you. And maybe you already have. I don't know. The second test is this. In order to establish a TIF district, the area has to be not only blighted or tending toward blight, but the village board has to be able to reasonably find that there hasn't been any redevelopment recently, and even more importantly, that there won't be any redevelopment in this area unless the village establishes a TIF district there. Okay? And that's really important. And Dan's hypothetical demonstrates why it's really important. Because in his hypothetical, the developer was going to redevelop that block anyhow, with or without TIF. Okay? If that were true, then all that tax money that would come from the $4 million in incremental EAV, it would have happened anyhow. Right? That's the hypothesis. So that extra $14,000 in your hypothetical, that would have been coming to the school district, even without a TIF district. So that's an opportunity cost right there. Okay? But that hypothetical is not going to qualify under the statute. So that TIF district shouldn't have been built. See? Because the legislature anticipated that problem. That's why they put the but-for test in the statute. Okay? And if that weren't true, let's change the hypothetical.
Yeah.
Back to my hypothetical. It's really bad. No developer would build there without help. Now, if the TIF district doesn't get created, the new shopping center doesn't get built, the blighted area sits there for another 23 years, the EAV doesn't go up, there aren't any incremental taxes for the schools or anybody else, so by creating the TIF district, nothing's lost. The money that gets put into the TIF fund wouldn't be coming to the school district anyhow because
It wouldn't exist.
it never would be created. The EAV wouldn't go up. There wouldn't be any more taxes. See? It's a brilliant concept.
Nothing's lost to to the existing taxing bodies, and in this case, to us.
Right.
Nothing's lost to us. Question becomes, what does the TIF create in terms of value to other parties? It clearly creates value to developers who get a subsidy from the TIF. It also clearly creates, if in your example of a shopping center, new sales taxes. New sales taxes, which benefit primarily the state, the county, and the village. But those benefits clearly don't run to us, because our only source of revenue is real estate taxes.
Right.
Okay.
Dean, if I could,
Yes.
this second scenario here, this but-for test, is there any statute that says, like, if there's been no building built in the last 5 years or 10 years, that it automatically wouldn't apply? I mean, how would you prove that a developer was going to or was not going to build something? I mean, that's a very tricky question, right?
It sure is, because it's hard to predict the future, isn't it?
Right.
Yeah.
And there's really been nothing going on here in downtown Westmont. I mean, there's
Yeah.
been change of businesses, but no actual buildings built.
Right.
Okay, other than publicly funded ones like the Westmont Center there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, you know, it's a hard question to answer, because it's hard to predict the future. So, you know, you have to look at all the facts and circumstances. You have to look at the trend within the area. You have to look to see whether there are any new buildings. If so, how many? And whether there's any information to suggest that there's interest in additional new building or new businesses moving in. Let me give you an example of a situation where the but-for test was, in my opinion, not met. And I'll try not to give anecdotes too often tonight, but I can't not give this one. I live in Park Ridge, and in 2003, the city of Park Ridge had acquired several acres in the downtown area right across the street from the commuter rail station, because a family of car dealerships that were all owned by the same family, Breedeman, had moved to another location in the city but farther out. And so when they did that, the city acquired the land that their dealerships had been on for 50 years or more, and the city wanted to redevelop them. And the city created a task force and spent 2 or 3 years studying the situation and what should we do and all that good stuff. And by the time 2003 rolled around, they had developed some plans. They wanted a mix of commercial and residential buildings on this site. And they were telling the community that they needed to establish a TIF district, because that was the only way this redevelopment was going to get built. The problem was that at the same time they were telling the community that they needed to establish a TIF district, they were also telling the community that over 60, not 6, not 16, but 60 private developers had been knocking on the door to City Hall wanting a piece of the action. As it happened, I was the president of the school board of the elementary school district in Park Ridge at the time. And I knew something about TIF. So I said, wait a minute. This isn't the way it's supposed to work. So the end result was that the elementary district got an agreement with the city whereby the city agreed to pay the district approximately 70 cents on the dollar for the life of the TIF. And the city expanded the TIF district to include not just this development area, but the whole downtown area. And the high school district got an agreement, the Park district got an agreement. And so the TIF district went forward and the development went forward, and that's what happened. But that's probably the best example of where the but-for test was, in my opinion, not met. Yes?
So who exactly decides whether an area qualifies for TIF? You've said the statute a couple times, but
Yeah.
I recognize that's not actually a deciding
Yes.
body.
In the
Who
first,
is
in the
it?
first instance, the village board. The village board
So
makes
it's
that
a
determination.
State statute, but the village board
Yes.
interprets it and makes the decision?
Yes, implements it, applies it. The statute gives that authority to municipalities in the Illinois Municipal Code. It's a section within the Illinois Municipal Code. So in the first instance, the village board makes that determination. And then, you know, if someone disagreed strongly enough, they could take them to court.
And in the example you provided, the village board was also the group that made the agreements with the minor taxing bodies for those payments.
That's right. That's right.
Via an intergovernmental agreement?
Yes.
Okay.
The agreement for District 64, that was the elementary district, was projected to be worth about $25 million over the life of the TIF. So that's the but-for test, and that's why it's important. So now let's talk about the types of potential financial impact that a TIF can have on a school district. In theory, if all the tests are met, it shouldn't have a big impact, because but for the TIF district, there wouldn't be any redevelopment, so there wouldn't be any new construction, so there wouldn't be the kinds of incremental EAV as a result of construction that we were talking about. Okay? And that's what 4A on the outline addresses. So we've already talked about 4A. Okay? There is also another potential impact that could result in the district actually losing some dollars, because in addition to the tax cap, school districts are limited in their tax levy by certain statutory maximums within the school code. So you have a rate limit on each of your funds. And if you happen to be bumping up against one or more of those caps, those statutory caps, and if as a result of a TIF district, you lose access to certain EAV that you would otherwise have access to, then that could limit your tax levy, because your rate would be bumping up against that cap, okay? We've already decided that, but then let's talk about how that might happen. Let's assume the but-for test is satisfied, so there wouldn't be any redevelopment. Over the course of most of our history, EAV grew a little bit each year, even if there wasn't any new construction, right? Up until a few years ago, when the recession hit, you could pretty much count on EAV going up by a few percentage points each year, right? Okay. And then the recession hit, and EAV actually dropped for the first time in anybody's memory. So the question is, what's going to happen now? You know, we seem to be maybe bottoming out on the recession, on the housing bubble. Property values may start going up again. And if they do, and that would be my guess, you can all, you know, decide for yourselves. But my assumption is that they'll probably start going up again, maybe not at the same steep rate that they had been, but they'll start increasing. So in the first year after the TIF district is created, if the EAV would have gone up a little bit, even without new construction, your district will lose access to that incremental EAV. And that incremental EAV would have occurred even if the but-for test was satisfied, right? Because it doesn't depend on new construction. It just depends on some incremental growth that happens over time.
But that would depend on how close we are to those caps, those tax caps.
Well, yes, that's right. That's right. And that was my first point, because if you lose access to that small growth, you might bump up against the tax cap, the cap on the rate.
Right.
So that's B on the outline. That's what that talks about. okay?
And it's the incremental growth within the TIF district
Yes.
only?
Yes.
Correct?
That's all I'm talking about now. But if you lose access to that growth, then that's also going to cause C, a shift in tax burden. Cause, let's assume that your EAV, putting aside new construction, just putting that out of the picture, and no TIF district, okay? Life goes on. And let's assume that EAV goes up a little bit each year, say 3%, okay? Each year, your EAV within that area, that block, was going to go up a little bit, and your tax levy was going to be spread over that incremental EAV as well as all the rest of it, right? And over 23 years, 3% per year, it adds up, doesn't it? It may not be much the first year, but in that 23rd year, it's going to represent a cumulative effect of some significance. And if your levy cannot be spread over that incremental EAV, then the rate for your district will be a little bit higher. And when that higher rate is applied to all of the other properties within your district, all of those other taxpayers will be paying more. Right?
Mm-hmm. And even in the case that you're not bumping up on your statutory rate limit, even in that case, if your base is frozen, and I'm a tax cap district that levies based on CPI, my levy is going to be spread because I'm not growing that base, right? My levy, by definition, is all, even without bumping up against the rate ceiling, I'm still shifting my tax burden.
Yes.
Anyway.
That's right. You're not losing dollars.
Not losing dollars.
Not losing dollars.
Shifting them to, in this case, to use a really specific example, instead of buildings on Cass Avenue paying some dollars more,
right?
Homeowners who live on Washington, 4 blocks in, will pay dollars more.
Right.
Even if you don't bump up against that.
Right. That's right. And just so you know, and maybe you already know, that was the problem that Marker was concerned about, was that tax shift. Okay? Okay. And then finally, 4D, if the TIF results in the construction of new residential development, and if that leads to new children moving into those units, into those residential units, and enrolling in your schools, then your district could be impacted by the costs of educating those new students. Okay? So,
Dean, on residential, can those inside a TIF district, can those be for sale housing, or are those generally rental housing?
can they be for sale, you said? Oh,
Inside-
sure they can.
Can they?
Oh,
Okay.
sure.
I just, because I can't figure out how the increment applies, but that's, we'll leave that alone.
Yeah, it can be single family, or it can be multifamily, it can be condos or apartments.
Okay. That's fine.
And that's in the TIF district?
Yes, right.
Our residential.
Right. And I believe that the plan that has been proposed for this particular TIF district talks about new residential.
It does, yes,
Yeah.
it does.
Although it also concludes, if I remember correctly, that because of the type of housing, they don't expect many new students to live there. So,
Sounds good. Looks good on paper.
maybe?
Can that change over the timeframe that the proposed developing would go on as far as what the land is used for? So we have I think like along this street here is part of the district, and this is, gets more residential as you go down.
Backing up against the tracks?
So that could be either residential or business. If a private developer wanted to come in and do either or, and they can decide that at any moment. So we don't know how much of the TIF district would be residential versus commercial.
Well, it can change, you know. I mean, the village has a zoning ordinance in place, it has a zoning map in place, and it has identified what they anticipate will be the nature of redevelopment within the various portions or parts of this proposed TIF district. But 23 years is a long time, and could that change? Of course.
And just to piggyback on that, while the plan may be for very high-end for-sale housing, condominium units or something like that, the reality could very well be that 7 years from now, an affordable housing developer can put together enough parcels to build affordable housing, utilizing the TIF to fund part of his project development costs, tax-exempt bonds, and then those are generally attached to low-income restrictions. And, you know, generally speaking, you'll get more children out of that kind of a housing event. That said, it's an interesting proposition for a TIF, especially a downtown TIF, or anything near a retail TIF, because it creates people, and people are what makes that urban TIF, that sort of downtown area TIF really work. Parking or people, and it's an interesting, you know, thing that I've seen any number of affordable housing developments that happen in TIFs because they're a great financing vehicle for the developer. So, sorry.
Having identified the kinds of potential impact that a TIF district can have on a school district, let's talk about methods of reducing that impact. At the bottom of the first page and top of the second page, one way is to reduce the size of the TIF district. That's what happened in the southern part of Westmont. As part of an agreement with Marker School District, the village agreed to remove all of the property south of 63rd Street. That resulted in a reduction of about 40% of the original size of that TIF district. Or there could be an agreement to reduce the length of the TIF. Instead of 23 years, it could be 20 or 15. Or it could even involve capping the amount to be financed through TIF revenue. I was involved in an agreement up in Fox Lake that did that, where the TIF was designed to be for a resort on the lake. And so they had a very, very specific plan for what it was going to cost and what it was going to involve, and the village was willing to cap the amount to be financed. It's the only time I've seen that happen, though. Another way to mitigate the harm, assuming there is any, and that's yet to be determined, is by an agreement involving payments made to the district. And I've identified four types of payments. The first is something called surplus. And this occurs when the village raises more TIF revenue, receives more TIF revenue than it needs to pay the bonds down, or to repay the developer, or to do whatever else it has in mind with TIF revenue, which could involve lots of different things. From a school district's perspective, in terms of trying to negotiate an agreement to mitigate the harm, the downside of surplus as a source of payments is that the statute requires that the distribution of surplus be pro rata to all of the taxing bodies. So the village, even if it wants to, can't agree to simply pay surplus to the school district without paying it to all of the other taxing bodies too, on a pro rata basis. based on your tax rates. So then for you to get $100 makes it that much more expensive to the village, because, you know, I think Dan said you get 70%. Well, that would mean they'd have to pay an additional 30% to everyone else. The second type of payment would be reimbursement for the cost of educating new students. There is a specific provision in the TIF Act which says that if new students move into residential construction financed in part with TIF money, subsidized by TIF money, and if those students attend your schools, then the village can reimburse the district for the cost of educating those students. In other words, pay you on the cost of tuition, essentially, for each of those students. I said can. It's not it's not required under the statute. It's an eligible cost, but it's not required. On the other hand, pursuant to an intergovernmental agreement, the village might agree and bind itself to making those payments. Third, there's a similar provision in the TIF Act which says that if a taxing body, if the school district incurs additional capital costs because of the TIF district, this is the limit. There's some limiting language in here. It's not just any capital costs. It's capital costs that are incurred as a result of the creation of the TIF district and in furtherance of the goals of the TIF district. Under those circumstances, the village can then make payments to the school district to reimburse you for those capital costs. Those capital costs, not all capital costs. So I know, for example, in discussions with Marie and Kim and Kevin, there's a school building in this proposed TIF district. And so you might think that, that you could use some TIF money to improve the condition of that school. I don't know, maybe. But I would caution you that you have to qualify under the statute, and there is that limiting language, and so, you know, it can't just be normal wear and tear or something that you'd need to do even if there wasn't a TIF district. You know, sometimes because there's a TIF district, maybe they want you to change locations. You know, maybe there's a dynamite need for a particular location, but it would be okay if your school was here instead of there, and it would cost, obviously, a lot of money to move from one place to the other. But if that was in furtherance of the goals of the TIF district, in other words, if that allowed economic development to take place on some grand scale, well, then maybe the cost of that new school would be paid out of TIF money. But you see what I'm saying? And then fourth.
Can I just ask a question, just to reiterate the conversation that we had, that does not fall under the items that we have been discussing in our facility discussions. It's not the items that we have been kind of talking about just on and on for a number of years on just regular facility improvements.
Right. I would not think so.
Specifically, yeah.
I would not think so. And then the fourth item here under this topic, consideration for not filing a lawsuit. If you were to determine that this TIF district would adversely impact your district financially, and if you also came to the conclusion that this TIF district did not qualify under the statute, that it really wasn't a conservation district under the criteria, or the but-for test wasn't met, and you had a reasonable basis for those conclusions, you could then, if you wanted to, after the village acted, file a lawsuit challenging that TIF district in court. The village obviously would prefer that you not do that. And the village has the legal authority to enter into an agreement with you and to provide consideration to the district in return for your agreeing not to bring that lawsuit. And those payments would not be, the village would not be required to make similar payments to all the other taxing bodies under those circumstances. So the difference, one of the big differences between number 4 and number 1 is that there's no pro rata payment requirement. Okay?
And that's what you accomplished in Park Ridge, effectively, it sounds like, is number 4.
Yes.
And these can be used in any combination that would apply.
Yes. Item number 6, steps in the process to establish a TIF district and the timeline. It is my understanding that the village has now scheduled the Joint Review Board to convene on April 5th. Very quickly, the statute requires that the village convene a joint review board, the members of which are representatives from each of several of the taxing bodies in the area. Not all of them, but some of them. And there's a list in the statute, so it includes the county and the township and the community college district and any public school districts that include portions of the TIF district. So in this case, only one, you, and the Park District. It would not include the fire department, because that's a part of the village government. Oh, it also includes the village. The village has a representative on the Joint Review Board. Doesn't include the fire department because that's a part of village government, so it's not a separate taxing body. If instead of a fire department in this area, there was a separate fire protection district, then it would get to participate, but there isn't. That's my understanding. If there's a separate library district, then it would get to participate. My understanding is that the library district here is a part of the village government. It looks to the village board to levy taxes, so it wouldn't participate. In any event, typically between 8 and 10 members. And there's a provision for a public member, someone who is just a citizen, who lives in the area and is chosen by the other members of the Joint Review Board. And the task of the Joint Review Board is to review the proposed TIF district, and a presentation would be made by the village and their consultant, and to evaluate whether or not it satisfies all of the statutory requirements. And then a vote is taken. And if the Joint Review Board votes that it does meet the statutory requirements, then their job is done, and the village board continues on with the process of creating the TIF district. If a majority of the Joint Review Board says, no, it doesn't meet the statutory requirements, then the statute says that the village has an obligation to enter into discussions with the Joint Review Board. And it has a period of 30 days in which to discuss the Joint Review Board's concerns and to propose amendments to the TIF district to satisfy those concerns. And if within those next 30 days the Joint Review Board decides that whatever changes have been proposed satisfy their concerns, it can then vote that the TIF district as amended meets the statutory requirements, and the village board continues. If, on the other hand, after 30 days, they haven't been able to satisfy the concerns of the Joint Review Board, then the village board can still create the TIF district by adopting the necessary ordinances, but must do it now with a 3/5 majority instead of a simple majority. Okay? So that process is supposed to start on April 5th, and the Joint Review Board has an initial 30 days in which to take a vote. So it goes pretty quickly. And then it's my understanding that the village has scheduled a public hearing, also required by statute, on May 2nd. And after the public hearing is closed, and it can be continued from day to day, but after it's closed, the village board would then need to adopt 3 ordinances, and would have to wait at least 14 days after the close of the public hearing, but could not wait more than 90 days in which to pass those ordinances. And then if it passes those ordinances, then it's done. Okay? So, finally, number 7, recommended steps. I see this as a potentially a 3-step process, although steps A and B are sort of all part of the analysis. Part A, evaluate the proposed TIF district. That really has to do with whether this proposed TIF district qualifies under the statute. It seems to me that the district ought to take a hard look at that, because you probably ought to know whether this proposed TIF district qualifies or not. And in order to do that, at the direction of Marie and Kevin and Kim today, I sent a FOIA request to the village requesting documents related to their proposed TIF district. And I'm sure we'll get a lot of documents. I would suggest you hire a consultant to review the TIF district. I've recommended somebody that I've worked with before, and I believe the plan is to do that. Certainly to meet with the village staff to discuss questions and concerns. I understand you've already had some meetings with them, and I'm sure they'll be happy to meet again as you learn more about this. And then whatever additional investigation and research you need in order for you to come to an independent evaluation. Part B has to do with the financial impact. So, you're going to need to answer these questions. Would new construction occur even without the TIF district? Well, that's a hard question to answer, no doubt about it. I think typically it involves trying to find out if there have been any expressions of interest in developing parts of this area in the last couple of years. I don't know the answer to that. Maybe not. We've just been through a recession. There hasn't been a lot of new construction. I don't know. You have to form an opinion as to whether EAV within this area would increase in the absence of redevelopment. That's that slow growth that we talked about. Is that going to happen again? I think EAV has been, the change in EAV has been negative for the last couple of years. 2, 3, 4 years as a result of the recession. Is it going to turn positive again? We can all ponder that. Would residential development cause an increase in enrollment? Well, that's an important question. I mean, I believe their plan calls for hundreds of new units. Will the TIF district cause an increase in capital expenses for your district? I don't know the answer to that. And then you have to try to quantify the impact, because if you decide that there would be an adverse impact, you're really better off if you can quantify it, because only then will you know what you're bargaining for. Got to know what to ask for. And then C, I think in most cases, districts who decide that there is going to be an adverse impact would prefer to negotiate an agreement with the municipality rather than file the lawsuit. Okay?
Ask a question?
Sure.
Okay. In the information that you had given us previously, which I shared with you earlier, I thought was very well explained this for us. One of the things it talks about is that, all these things don't necessarily have to be adversarial, because good schools make for good community make good schools, and all of us wear many different hats, right. Taxpayers,
Yep.
So one of the things that I like that you talk about in your brief and what you've talked about tonight is that, we all share the same concerns. And so I liked how the discussion is that it doesn't have to be an adversarial conversation, in that once the district does its due diligence and having these conversations and looking at these documents, I would think one of the things you also allude to is a good rapport with your village. And I would like to think that our school district does have a very good rapport with our village.
Well, I think the fact that you're meeting in this room is,
Yes, yes. And so, you know, I would just like to say that I'm happy to see that that is just definitely out there, and that it doesn't have to be adversarial, and that hopefully we can find some way to have some discussions that everybody can benefit
Yeah.
from something like this.
yeah, and I would say that more often than not, that's the case. Any other
With
questions?
regard to shifting the dollars,
Right.
shifting the burden to the
Right.
taxpayers, given that the village and the village will pick up the extra dollars in the incremental, the 4 million,
Yes.
let's just say.
Yes,
So the taxpayers will benefit ultimately anyway. But given that, and I know it goes into a TIF fund and then it gets put back into the TIF, but let's say if this is a 15-year TIF or 23 years.
okay.
After 23 years, the taxpayers are going to realize a real benefit.
Well, we should talk about that. That's a good point. At the end of the 23 years, what happens?
They have an option to extend, don't they?
I'm sorry?
Do they have an option to extend?
Well, they have the potential opportunity
Yeah.
to extend. I can tell you that in recent years, the practice of the legislature, and this is not written into the law, but the practice of the legislature has been not to extend TIF districts unless the school districts approve. So it's not that 3/5 majority we were talking about before, the practice of the legislature in recent years has been to give school districts a veto power on the extension of TIFs. So, but getting back to your question, let's assume that the TIF district is established for 23 years. It runs its course with some degree of success. And at the end of the 23 years, the EAV, instead of being down here, is up here, right? Okay? When the TIF is dissolved, all of that incremental EAV gets added to your tax base. It gets added to your total EAV. There's an exception, a one-time exception to the tax cap that allows you to take that and add it to your base. And so from that point on, you could be getting just that much more in tax money with the same tax rate. Or you could be levying, you could be levying that much more, notwithstanding the tax cap. Your levy could go up, whatever your rate would produce, once that EAV, that incremental EAV is added to your tax base,
Right.
you could levy that amount. So that could be a huge
Is it added,
gain.
is the one-time exception added as new growth, or is it added simply as EAV base?
Well, it's added as new growth,
As new
which
growth,
is why
that's
it's,
a one-time, okay.
which is why it's exempt from the tax cap.
Okay.
So I had one more follow-up question. Limiting the duration of the TIF, when we talk with the village, would they be limiting the life of the TIF as a whole, or just as it relates to the school district? In other words.
No, there can't
They
be
can't-
different lives.
So it's the life of the TIF district. So in the event that it's a 15-year TIF,
Yeah.
the village could see the benefits of this in 15 years as opposed to 23. At the length of the TIF, and then we're all going to see a benefit, provided this works the way we hope it works.
Right.
Okay, thanks.
Well, potentially, the village would see benefits right away in terms of sales tax revenue.
If they have commercial development,
Commercial.
retail, if they have retail
which-
development,
Which they
sure.
clearly have planned. yeah.
Sure.
District.
Failed TIFs, because not every TIF is wildly successful, unfortunately. you know, what does a failed TIF, what are the implications of a failed TIF to school districts?
Well, I suppose the first thing that comes to mind when you ask about a failed TIF is a TIF in which nothing happens.
Or not enough, yes.
Well, let's assume nothing happens. Let's assume there's no redevelopment. I mean, that's the point, right? That's the goal, redevelopment. So, you know, a village establishes a TIF district and nobody comes. None of those private developers that you want coming in and redeveloping and investing private money come. And so nothing changes. In that case, I don't think there is a big impact on the school district. You know,
The failed scenario I'm thinking of, though, is more along the lines of take a new retail development that for whatever reason is poorly planned or poorly executed. You know, and so you take existing EAV and existing buildings off the roll, you put in a new one, which, you know, for the time being, at first is successful, but then becomes not successful. And so when the TIF rolls off, you know, your EAV is effectively the same or lower, if it's lower.
yeah. Well, and that can happen, and I think that has probably happened more often in the last 6 or 7 years than ever before because of the recession. I think that there are places where, you know, old buildings were knocked down, reducing EAV, and nothing was built. And then not only is there no incremental EAV, but EAV has been reduced in the area, and so those parcels are producing even less in tax dollars for the various taxing districts than they were before. So that is possible. And I know of at least one example where a municipality is hurting because their projections, which were made before the recession, have not materialized as a result of the recession. And so debt that was incurred with the expectation that TIF revenue would be sufficient to cover payments on the debt has not happened. And that's a serious problem for the municipality, not so much for the other taxing districts.
Yeah, well, by extension, you've got interrelationships between the taxing bodies that becomes difficult.
Well, it's obviously it's a negative influence on the community as a whole.
So in the event that the business, say, is poorly planned, you know, if nothing happens, that would be considered probably the ultimate failure of the TIF district and really no impact on the school district.
Not much.
Is that fair to say? Not much.
Not much.
And if a development comes in and it doesn't go from 1 million to 5 million, so there's not that 4 million incremental, then we won't be losing 14,000, I think 14,000 was the number. We won't be losing that much. We'll be losing less.
Right.
So it's really, if it doesn't succeed, it's going to have a major impact on the municipality, but not necessarily on the school district.
Not as much.
Yeah.
Right.
Is the surplus, when you talked about the surplus, is that based on each project or each parcel and the costs that
No, that's overall.
overall?
Yeah.
Okay.
In other words, you know, especially in a proposed TIF district as large as the one that we're talking about here, there could be multiple projects. And the village will commit certain amounts for each project. And then, you know, in the aggregate, the question is, will the revenue exceed the expenses or vice versa? And if the revenue exceeds the expenses, then there'll be a surplus.
But it's spread out over everything. It's not
Right, it's not on a
You
project-by-project.
don't look at like the expenses that the TIF money would pay for a given, say, apartment building that gets built here on this street or something. And then they need sewer upgrades and they need some infrastructure. And all said and done, you get higher tax revenue when the project is complete that exceeds the actual amount of dollars that were spent on that particular parcel. But that extra money would be surplus for that parcel, but not surplus for the aggregate of the TIF district.
Yeah, it all gets aggregated.
Okay.
Dean, down in District 60, they had talked about that when you shifted this tax burden, that they were talking about the average homeowner in that district was going to pay about $5 more per year in property taxes. That was the number that was in the newspaper anyways.
Yeah, I think there was some, I think there was some disagreement as to what those numbers really are.
Well, and was that before or after they shrunk the size of the district? Do you know? I mean, the size of the TIF district?
You know, I don't recall.
But that was the direct relationship there. They wanted that TIF district smaller so that there would be less burden on the other taxpayers, correct?
Yes.
They were also losing a substantial portion of their commercial base as well in the originally proposed, so.
Yes.
it
Yes,
had-
the
it had
sense,
a-
the sense on the part of Marker District was that most of the redevelopment would come from the northwest quadrant at that intersection, and not from the other three quadrants, if you know the area. By far, the largest portion of that TIF district is in the northwest quadrant. It's much deeper, much wider. It's quite a large area, which involves many large parcels that are used now for industrial purposes. And so the thought was that that quarter, the northwest quarter of that intersection held the most promise. And that's a part of the thinking on the part of the Marker Board when they proposed an agreement.
And part of the concern on the tax shift, though, as well, it wasn't just a number for the first year that the tax shift, you know, so the tax shift has a first-year event, if you will, or a second-year event, if you will.
Well, every year, I think.
But then it compounds annually, yes?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So where we are now is basically, under number 7, is to evaluate the
district,
documents
right.
and that, and have the consultant work on that, and then we have to see where we can go from there.
Right.
Is that
That's it.
your recommendation to us?
Sure.
And Kevin? Kim? All right.
So do we have somebody that's doing, so we have council's looking at the legalities, whether it meets the criteria, and then what about the financial impact? Do we have a consultant hired to do that?
We've contacted the same consultant that worked with Marker
Okay.
on theirs, and so that does help our process a little bit because Dean's familiar with the area because he was involved in reviewing the documents, and then also the consultant is familiar with the area, so it should be
Yeah. Now,
beneficial.
that consultant that I think you're referring to, Mr. Krakauer, he's a planner, he's not a financial analyst. So he would help to analyze the criteria and whether this proposed TIF district meets the criteria. The financial analysis, we haven't talked about a consultant. And it may be that you won't need one. It may be that Kim and we can certainly provide some assistance in that area as well. We may be able to do what's needed. I don't know. We'll see.
It seems like the timeframe's kind of short here.
Right, very
so
short.
I'm worried
It's,
about
it's an aggressive
Yeah.
timeframe.
having, you know, and it's, you know how busy.
Kim, I have to believe PMA has somebody who practices in this area.
I'll check with them, and I've got a few sources.
Yeah, good.
So we will be looking to analyze all of this and then hopefully have further meetings with the,
Yeah, and tonight I didn't think it was necessary or appropriate to get into the different statutory criteria and, the 13 factors, and they have found that there are 5 of them, and I didn't think we needed to really talk about those because it would have made this a much longer discussion. But next time.
One more quick question. Would you suggest that we have all this stuff, all this information ready before that joint review board convenes?
Yeah, that would be the goal.
Okay.
That would be the goal. And we may find it very difficult to get that done. So you may find that you need to ask the village to postpone things.
When was the FOIA filed?
Today.
It was, okay.
All right.
Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes,
Thank you.
Matt?
Thank you, Dean.
Thank you very much, especially for coming tonight, since time is of the essence and it's not necessarily spring out there, so
Like I said, I always love to talk about it, too.
thank you. Thank you. Okay. The next item on the agenda, presentation of monthly financial statements.
We'll make this very short. Again, not much different from any of the previous months. We did receive the first quarter categorical payments from the state during the month of January. The state continues to owe us $365,326 overall. $260,900 of that is in the education fund, and $104,000 is in the transportation fund. Revenues are pretty much where they should be at this time of year, although in the education fund, they're just a little bit below average. And as far as expenditures go, again, in the ed fund, they're where they should be at this time of year. Transportation fund continues to be a little bit low due to Westway's timing of the invoices. And expenditures in the O&M fund are lower than average. And some of that we're experiencing because of the mild winter, except for tonight.
You had to say that, right? You had to put that in writing, didn't you, Miles?
And so anyway, and so our utility costs, and then obviously our labor with overtime has been a little bit lower than anticipated. So hopefully we'll be able to maybe do some of our maintenance projects that have been being put off with some of the money that's left in there. We'll be bringing that to you probably in the next month or so as we just kind of get through this month and see where things are at. And the other reports are attached for your review. Does anybody have any questions?
I have one question. Considering that the state obviously continues to be in, just financial meltdown, the payments that are vouchered to us, is there any change in the concern level about us not ever getting that money? Or, do you hear anything? Do you?
No, I mean, there was just some information out inland that we'll share with you. And obviously, we have a pension crisis. We also have some concerns about our federal funding now because, and no agreements have been made there. We will have to monitor that to see if something happens. We shouldn't receive those impacts. Those cuts to some of our federal funding would be for FY13. However, they're not supposed to impose those cuts in this fiscal year, but they would impose those cuts out of next year's allocation. So again, we'll have to monitor things going forward, and it's a very, we're just constantly monitoring things and trying to update and see what that impact would be.
Thank you.
One quick question. In light, you mentioned ed fund expenditures are in line with where you would expect them to be in light of various contract settlements. Do we expect to be over that budget by the end of the fiscal year?
No.
You budgeted appropriately then?
It depends. We've got a couple issues out there that may impact things, but right now I think we should be okay.
Okay.
But obviously we'll be monitoring that very closely in the next month and a half so that if we do have to amend the budget, that we can get that done.
Good. Is that it from you, Kim?
Yes.
Okay, and no other questions? Okay, then we'll move on to the next item. Staffing and kindergarten and that, how do you want to start that? You want to start with John?
Yeah, let's, I'm going to move to the other side. We'll start with John. Tonight's John's birthday.
Oh,
So,
wow, happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
spend it with us.
If we knew.
John's going to focus on the junior high, and then I'll talk about, my computer went to sleep. Talk about the kindergarten piece. Are you,
It's the top one right up there. First of all, thanks for the excuse to get out of shoveling tonight. That worked out really well.
You think that's
Luckily, I have family that's about 3 miles south. I think I'm going to be staying with them tonight. So tonight, I just want to take a few moments, hopefully not too long, to discuss where we've been as Westmont Junior High School and where we're currently at, and then where we're hoping to go in the future. So I'm going to make this short and sweet. I'm going to blaze through some of these slides here because I believe that you've seen some of them already. So this is the current reality. This is the state AYP report, which states that the Westmont Junior High School is currently making AYP. Going into the performance data, this slide's going to show the increasingly over the last 6 years that the average scores that we've received at the junior high school have been above and beyond the average state scores. This slide is showing you the last 3 years, the averages, and what the cut scores look like when they're adjusted. And as you can see there, there's no red, and the red would show the students that would be in the warning area for academics, as far as reading and math were concerned. So the last 3 years. And our numbers at the top there, as you'll see, are, as far as reading is concerned, 83, 86, 89, going up to 80, 88, 91, and 88. And those are meets and exceeds. This next slide I'm going to show you in January, late January of 2013, so we're just talking about a month and a half ago, a little bit less, the Illinois State Board of Education has adopted new cut scores that are going to be part of this scoring of the ISAT. So this is a slide, this next slide is from the IIRC, which is through Northern Illinois University. And what they've done basically is applied the new cut scores to the last 3 years of data. Okay, and that's what this slide is right here. So as you look at that, we're seeing a little bit of red, which no school board likes to see red. Nobody likes to see red. And you can see the meets and exceeds for reading are 62, 61, 64, and then 65, 68, 67. Using these cut scores, we would not be making AYP currently. Now, the cut scores were changed for a number of reasons, and there's a whole bunch of different information out there as far as the Illinois State Board of Education has published that, the frequently asked questions, and so that is available on SB.net. And then just a comparison with one next to the other, just a little bit easier to compare. The state of Illinois is expecting approximately 22% decrease in student achievement in the cut scores of students meeting and exceeding when they take these new cut scores and they apply them to the ISAT test. Also, the ISAT test has changed this year, and they're applying more of the Common Core into the ISAT to get ready for the PARCC assessment that's coming down the road. So what does this mean? This means that we have a mountain to climb, right? We have a lot of new educational reform, some old educational reform in the last 5 to 6 years, but that's okay because we're about challenges and there's no problem with that. And you know, when we're looking at this educational reform, we're seeing that they're looking at students and what students need to succeed. And so as long as the eye's on the students, the focus on the students, we're good with that. We'll take any challenge. Of course, we need our tools to climb mountains. And so that's my brother, I tried to get him to give me a picture of him. He just climbed Kilimanjaro not too long ago, but he needed a good amount of gear in order to do that. And so obviously we need resources. We got to gear up. So in order to tell you what we've done so far as our gearing up, And I'm not going to go into everyone. I would love to explain to you all of the amazing things we've been doing and with my partners, my teachers. I'm only going to highlight a few of them. And then if you have further questions, I'd love to answer them, but I know that time is of the essence. So the peer observation, this is something that I tried to incorporate in my former district, and my teachers saw the value to right away. One of the great things about, when you're an administrator, you have the opportunity to go into students or teachers' classrooms and see them teach. And so whereas a teacher, I thought I was a pretty darn good teacher, I realized in going into a whole bunch of classrooms as an evaluator that, wow, I was so-so, and there's just some amazing things going on. And so what this peer observation is, it's actually peer observation sharing high-quality instruction. Teachers are going into each other's classrooms and seeing what they're doing and having discussions and reflections afterward and determining how does that validate what they're currently doing in the classroom and how can they change instruction. Another thing is the CHRIS project. This is something that we've brought into the school, and we were hoping that approximately 3 or 4 teachers would jump on board, and CHRIS basically gives you different strategies and techniques, just good strategies and techniques that you can use for good teaching in the classroom. We were hoping 3 or 4 teachers would jump on board with this, and we're excited to say that we have 11 teachers that are part of this, and our literacy coach is leading it currently. They're talking, they're meeting, and they're discussing what the different new techniques that they're doing in the classroom. So it's pretty exciting. Next, we have professional development on Descartes. This is something that Amy Quattrone, the assistant principal, performed at one of our last SIP days. And Descartes is, we have the MAP test, which I'm sure everybody's somewhat familiar with, that we have 3 times a year. And Descartes is a tool, the online tool, that you dive deeper into the data to determine where students are at specifically, or where classes are at, and what we need to put more emphasis on in the future. And so our teachers just got a little bit more professional development. It's a huge tool. It's very powerful. And so I was very happy that Amy got with our teachers, and she was able to provide some more professional development. Teachers are looking at it deeper. Rising Star is a new platform. It's actually been around for about 2 years, but it's a new platform that's web-based on creating continuous school improvement plans. So instead of doing the 2-year plans that are eventually put off to the side and a new plan is created, this is a new type of plan that the state is providing, a new platform, I should say, in which you take a bunch of indicators, and in this case 104 indicators, you assess your school, you evaluate it, and then you make a plan for improvement as well. It's daunting, but the key is that we've created a building leadership team that is once again made up of quite a few members. I've got about half of my faculty currently on it, which just says that their dedication to wanting to see our school improve is it's up here, and it's a tough process, but we're doing that. As you can see, there's definitely more things going on. The articulation, we're meeting with the elementary schools and the high school, and we're figuring out what we need to do. We're stuck in the middle, but that's a good place to be. So next we're going into the where our current status is. I'm not going to go through every one of these. Currently, with the ISAT and the changes going on with ISAT, it's hard to say where we're going to be at. Our goal is to exceed the state's average expectations, and we have no idea what the new part of the Common Core is going to look like in the ISAT test. So we're going to see where we're at, and then we're going to build from there and make improvements. We also have the Common Core is covered by the ELA standards, so the English Language Arts standards, and then the math standards. Those have been published for quite some time. So we're implementing and planning those into our daily lesson plans. And then this month into the next generation science standards, which is the science's answer to what the Common Core looks like. That's going to be published supposedly this month. It's been put off a little bit, but once that's published, then we'll be making that a part as well. We're continuing our work in PLCs and working with the Common Core and working with our planning for the RTI, the response to intervention process. So we're looking at it as a district, and then we're also looking at it as a school. What do we currently have in place? Where are some of the gaps? Is what we have research-based or not? Is it working? If a kid's in it too long, we need to move them because we need to find something else that's going to be working. We're also looking at our bilingual program and determining what kind of changes we need to make for the future. Currently, we have one ESL class at the end of the day, and we would like to provide some more support for our students with those needs. If I'm going fast for anyone, just let me know, but I'm trying to be respectful of time. Formal feedback, it's been mentioned a few times. The 5 Essentials survey has been given out. Now it's been given out to our students and to our teachers on March 1st. The 5 Essential surveys go over 5 key essentials, five key points that a school needs to improve, and then we'll be able to tie this together with Rising Star for the continuous school improvement process. We'll get the results soon. I believe it's somewhere around June, and then we'll be able to have that on the report card. We have on the report card is going to be for the teachers' response and the teachers and the students' response. There is a parent option also, but we need to have at least 30% of the parents fill out the survey in order to get any kind of report. The teacher and the students' response is actually going to be on the report card, though, come October. The new faculty, staff, and principal. So we have a bunch of new faces over at the junior high, and my goal is that we're working as a high-functioning team, as you would want to have with any team. So we're doing quite a few different things here. We're putting an emphasis on hiring the best, maintaining the best, retaining the best, and then working on these professional development plans, staffing plans, and then in Rising Star as well. Our schedule. And that's one of the key reasons that I'm here, ladies and gentlemen. Our schedule is in need of change. This is something that Amy and I looked at really before the school year got going, but too many things were already in place that I didn't want to act irrationally. So we're looking to talk to you tonight a little bit about what we need so that we have the best opportunity possible for our students within the resources that we have. And so the plan is I've already shared this with my team leaders, and I've shared this with my building leadership team and Mr. Carey, and I would like to share some of the highlights of that schedule with you today. So there have been some changes from 1967 to now in what our teens are like and what is expected of them in schools. This is a little more accurate of what we're looking for from our graduates and what our graduates need from us. So there's a lot that's required not only of our students but as our faculty to get us to this point. So when we're thinking of the next schedule that we're going to be having, we need to be having our vision, our district vision in mind, and that's what we've tried to make sure. So why are we changing? We want to make sure that we continue to foster the innovation, the school-wide innovation that's going on. We want to implement the comprehensive literacy model that we're adopting as a district. We want to ensure that students have the content and able to apply it to real-world problems and the time in order to do that. Ensure adequate time for intervention and enrichment opportunities, and that it's offered by certified staff. And of course, build relationships, and that's across the board. So change. How do we do this? How do we create this new schedule with no excuses in mind? We need to focus on child success. We got to fix the reoccurring problems that we've had continuously that are jumping out at us, those neon signs, and then reach out and educate. This is not something that I just kind of we threw together a whole bunch of blocks. We said, hey, we're pretty good at Excel, and just chunked things together. We've reached out to not only schools in the area and within the state, but also outside of the state, and seeing what other schools with our similar demographic, with our similar social economics, and we've said, what are you doing? What's working? What's not working? And from there, we've made a first draft of a schedule. By the way, I've made a lot of cold calls to different districts saying, I swear I am a principal of a junior high school. You can go to my website. So, but we've gotten, I want to say, somewhere around 15 to 20 different drafts of schedules that are out there that we've been looking at. So this is a slide that I don't believe that you have in your reports, but I was asking students, a couple students that might have parents present here tonight, but I was asking them, what is it that you need to see as far as making changes in the future to make yourself more successful, and then also to make Westmont Junior High School successful? And by the way, for those that are squinting right now, I will be putting this on a blog after today so that other people can take a look at it. And because these are our students that are speaking, I am going to read these statements because I believe their words are important. So they're saying iPads. They're saying more opportunities to share thoughts and ideas with peers, time during school to do homework, increased technology in classes, and a study hall. More time to check, review homework so I know if I've got it or not. Open dress code. That means they want to be able to wear other dress code. They don't like our dress code currently.
Forms.
They want to chew gum. I tried to explain that the school district I came from actually had a uniform dress code. They wore white polos and blue slacks, and am I allowed to say slacks? Pants. And so that all of a sudden she's like, okay, never mind. I'm not really sure because school is pretty good. It's already the way it is. Some free time where kids could blow off some energy and get back to work. Longer due dates on projects, peer work, sit in pods so you have more interaction so it's not boring. Teachers that can relate to you, a study hall with help from a teacher. Acting classes and other classes, mini units. A study hall with teachers, longer time for exams, specialized classes based on student interests, more opportunities to go deeper, teachers that are nice and engaging with various teaching styles, no homework club after school, lunch buddies was better. Next time, or less time for passing periods, so I have more time to study and do work. I loved that one. Time to get help from the teacher when I don't get it. And then my wife would love this one, better decoration in school and halls. So a few different comments there from our students. And so the next page, or the next slide here, is what our current schedule has, and that is I'm sorry, I need to grab my other piece of paper here. Enrollment has steadily risen at Westmont Junior High School. We have an inflexible schedule. We have large class sizes, and it's not just in literacy and sixth grade social studies. We have one common plan time for the teams currently, the academic teams. Trouble with adequate supervision in PE. Cross grade level PE classes. A media specialist is not able to meet with teams currently because of the class loads that she teaches. No Spanish or foreign language. Interventions are not as fluid, so students aren't able to move in and out of interventions as necessary. They'll be in interventions for a longer period of time, maybe for a quarter or half of or a semester or such. Exploratory and PE teams cannot meet during the day if need be. 8 different math courses when the high school has requested that we go deeper and not necessarily faster. Okay, and that is one of the things that if you look at the new Common Core curriculum for math, it states going deeper into it. Okay, so the highlights of the new schedule, and once again, this is a draft that I've been working on. We have the high school was just granted, I'm not sure if it's been out there or not, so I'll share it. Just received an AP grant, which is pretty phenomenal. And so one of the pieces of that grant is that there can be a pre-AP course that would be given at the social studies level at 8th grade. I've already talked to Mr. Prisney about this. We're pretty excited about it. There's other things there, but I don't want to steal the high school's thunder. Jack would be very upset with me. We would have 6 literacy blocks integrating technology into the comprehensive literacy model. We would also, just when we talk about literacy and the Common Core standards, the English language arts standards, this is also not only just that the literacy teachers are teaching this. This is standardized so that all of our teachers, every single one of them, exploratory, PE, everyone is a literacy teacher as well as being whatever their content area is. And this is something that in their lesson plans they show evidence of as well and that we ask about when we're talking to them. So a Spanish class for 8th graders, 3 special resource teachers would be teaching a reader booster class. This is one of our interventions currently. Additional interventions, reteaching, study halls, enrichment periods at the beginning or the end of the day, which is facilitated by teachers. Common lunches, personal and team planned for teachers, for the majority of the teachers. So this would improve any opportunities for co-teaching, collaboration, working with each other.
Just a quick question.
Yes, sir.
Don't we already have an individual plan plus a common plan?
Yes, we do. At the junior high level,
Yeah.
we have the academic teams have an academic team time.
Yeah.
So that is when the grade level teams, so the 6th grade teachers come together. There is a little bit of a conflict there when we have teachers teaching multiple grade levels, so there's a little bit of a conflict there. But yes, we do have that every single day, and then there's a personal plan time as well. So this first draft would have a common team plan, but then their personal plan would also be in common as well. So if the 2 literacy teachers wanted to work together during their personal plan, they could do so. Or if the social studies teacher said, hey, I'd really like to work and incorporate some of the things you're doing in your literacy class in my social studies class, once again, that co-teaching piece of it and co-planning as well. Did I answer? Good to go?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
Additionally, let's see here. Better supervision in the locker room. We would have health classes, physical education classes by grade level. What this will do is, I don't know if you've ever taken a health class. I went to a private school when I was younger, so my health class was actually taught by a priest, and they separated the boys from the girls. And one of the opportunities for that is that the questions really came out as opposed to being shy because the opposite sex was right there. So we would be having split gender classes, and that would also help us with supervision in the locker rooms. We'd have a songwriting course. I think you had an opportunity not too long ago to hear Caitlin McGovern about what she's doing with songwriting, so we would have that as well. Grade level band classes, they would be smaller, less congested. Media specialist would be used as a coach and embed technology into the curriculum. So she would be teaching technology through the actual literacy classes. Specialized tech classes for 7th and 8th grade based on project-based learning. And I'll go into that in a little bit more here. The literacy coach would continue co-teaching with teachers and looking at student data with teachers in order to figure out best practice and improve instruction. The bilingual program would upgrade to a ESL literacy block, so instead of having just one period of ESL support, they would have a true literacy block. So that's 2 periods right there. And then we would have flexibility to explore other interests, and that's that mini unit piece of it and the enrichment piece. One other thing that I've heard quite a bit about, because I am on the district, I kind of head up the district climate committee, is the social emotional piece. And at times that students don't have a chance to have a group, that would be there as well. So this, it would be 9th period. Most of the time this enrichment or intervention period would be taking place during the 9th period. And during that period of time, students would be able to come together. Our social worker would be able to meet with groups as well at different times, and we would be able to do activities, team building activities as well.
John, if I could ask a quick question.
Absolutely.
It's more got to do with the time of the school day.
Yes.
Are we talking about trying to align it with the high school here a little bit better?
Well, we were, but we do have to, like I said before, we have to look at what we have and what's real. And right now, when in talking to some of their administrators, it seems like the additional cost that we would have from transportation would not necessarily allow that. That would be something that would need to be determined by the school board at the time. So I know that would be shared.
Okay, well, I know you were, if I'm correct, I think we were trying to do have some teachers come from the high school, come to start teaching some more advanced classes at the junior high level. Are we still going to be trying to do something like that?
That is currently not in the plan.
Okay.
Right now, currently, we share a math teacher with the high school, and So Miss Barnes is 0.6 over at the junior high, and then 0.4. And we do have some students that are going across the street to the high school in order to take geometry. What this would allow for next year, and our math program is changing, but considering we've started certain students on a certain path, we want to finish that with integrity. So we have enough students, approximately 30 students that would be going across the street next year for that class. So instead of them going across the street, the roads are icy. It doesn't make sense having that necessarily occur. We can house that in our own school, and we do have approximately 130 eighth graders next year. So next year we have the largest school size population that we've had in quite some time. Okay. Now there is the enrichment piece of it, and just because we're not taking some teachers from the high school doesn't mean there won't be enrichment classes, because we definitely want to see that occurring.
Okay.
So coming from the Common Core, and this is based on technology, students need to be this is stated in the Common Core, students need to be self-directed learners, effectively seeking out and using resources to assist them, including teachers, peers, print, and digital reference materials. So teachers are just a piece of this right now. Not sure if this looks familiar, but technology is obviously a part. If I have to hear my son say, "Dad, can I use your iPad?" I mean, he's going to be 3 on Saturday. But if he says it one more time, it is part of our culture. It needs to be embedded. And so that's where we're going away from the 3 computers classes, the 3 conventional computers classes that we have, and we're integrating that into the literacy classes and having 2 teachers, so that the technology is more about not being separate from the classes, but being really integrated into the classes. So these were just some pitches that I recently received when I was talking to Mr. Faust, who is one of the individuals. He's the current chorus teacher, and he happens to be the director of the Illinois Music Educators Association as well. So he has a huge passion as far as technology is concerned. And he would be teaching 2 of these PBL/technology courses. These are some of the different ideas that he has. So once again, using the media specialist as a coach and integrating technology into classes, but also having some other classes available for our students to be part of. So in review, we continue to outperform the rest of the state, or I'm saying the state average. The ISATS cut scores and the test have changed for this year. Educational reform is adding to some challenges that we're looking forward to just charging ahead and meeting and exceeding. And our students need more from us than they've historically been given in the past. So our staffing and our scheduling has got to definitely reflect what we need for our students, the 21st century learners. So now is the question time.
Question.
Yes.
One of the things that you state, and one of your very first things, is the enrollment has increased, and the large class size, small class size. Mm-hmm. So from a parent's perspective or a student's perspective, is there some way to tell us how that would work in terms of that?
I'm going to, and that is...
I know that's maybe coming down the road, but how does that look to the day-to-day?
Well, it is difficult. Because of our current programming, there are some classes that are lopsided, and then we try to make it as consistent as possible. But we do have students, or we do have classrooms of 30 plus, and specifically when you start looking at literacy classes, that is very difficult. Obviously, in any classes, anything can be done. But in order to teach the comprehensive literacy model, in order to truly teach literacy, and I think we all agree that math and literacy are extremely important, just as the arts. Everything's important. But in order to do this effectively, the smaller class sizes are important for the integrity of the program. We are looking at, because if we look at what what another school district close to us has been doing as far as a formula that they have created. We are, as far as if we look at FTE and where we are at the junior high level, I'm not going to lie, we're definitely hurting FTE wise if we look at the model that a neighboring school district is using as far as determining FTE and class compared to class sizes. We also, in part of our programming, is the issue for the lopsidedness and where we have a class size of 30 plus and a class size of a handful of students. And so that's what this schedule would do. This schedule, along with the some programming changes, would allow for us to make those classes more standardized as far as the numbers are concerned.
That is something that, we have talked about in the past here, just watching things and in some previous discussions about class sizes, and that, as they leave the elementary, they're going somewhere. Mm-hmm. So they're going to the junior high. And so I guess what you're saying is that, you're seeing it, and what you're trying to do with
there's
some potential FTE is to deal with those issues. Am I right on that?
Yes, we're obviously when we look at hiring people, we're hiring the best, and I think we all wear a lot of different hats, as somebody mentioned to me a long time ago, and you do the best you can with the situations that you have. I was a soldier before I was an educator. And so we look at that, but really the strain currently on Westmont Junior High School is great. I'm not going to lie. Are they doing a great job? Our teachers are doing a great job. Our kids are happy. They're working hard. But I believe that in order to ensure the success of each student, we need to have certain things in place, these interventions. That's huge. If a student is not meeting the standard, if they're not meeting the target of that lesson, they need a place to go that they can be retaught, that the interventions are in place. If a child is coming in to the junior high with a third grade level, reading level, then obviously there's going to be more support that needs to be in place in order to bring that student up to where they need to go. So it is a definite strain. I don't want to sound defeatist, but it is a strain currently.
Well, I'm just saying from my own opinion, I agree with you, and I'm happy to see this conversation, because we are seeing, we take these elementary classes and we give them to you, and then, I think that's one of the things why we talk about this, is that we need to make sure that those classes, are balanced and stuff. So you're saying that the things that you're looking for from us are working towards that goal?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
John, I have a couple
Yeah,
of
sure.
questions. First of all, I appreciate you going through it fairly quickly in the interest of time and everything going on tonight, so thank you for doing that. There's kind of three pieces I'm not clear that I got out of, since we are going through it quickly. The
Definitely.
first one is timing, as far as you have a lot of content in your presentation. I mean, you're tackling and doing a tremendous number of things on all different places, and I don't get a clear sense of when those things are happening. So I think from your description, some are going on currently, some are planned for next school year. When are things fully implemented? I'm not completely clear on, sort of when the whole picture is there a done? I mean, obviously, it's a journey, it's not a destination, but you must have some timeline. So that's one piece. The second piece would have to do with kind of financial impacts. You're talking about things that we all want. Spanish for the 8th grade, well, I'm not gonna lie to you, I want Spanish in every grade, right? So, let's be honest. Or language in every grade, we don't have to limit it to Spanish, but obviously there's a cost, and there's timing, and there's, a lot of things that go into that, as well as almost everything that you talked about. There's cost and timing that goes into those. So I think that for things that you want to do, particularly for next school year, that things that are going to be time and money and that type of thing, we probably need to start talking some real language about what that's going to take and what the cost is and that type of things. We have some hard decisions to make. And then I guess the final piece is just, obviously the testing stuff that's coming down is pretty scary, and I think Marie kind of alluded to too, class sizes all over the place. I know, at least in one of the two elementary buildings, the current 5th grade is the largest class in the building, and we're now going to be passing them. I think it's the same in both buildings. they're coming really soon. So, you're already talking about being pressed and short FTE and that type of thing, and we are about to pass you like one of the largest classes that's in the district right now, I think. So you covered a lot tonight, but I think, from a follow-up perspective is how do we track these things? What kind of information does the board get back next month, the month after, the month after? So we're halfway, a little more than halfway through the school year. We're seeing you now. You've been doing a million things since the beginning of the year. So I think I would like, and I think probably several of us, when do we hear back from you? And what kind of progress? And I don't need answers to any of those three things right now, but that's sort of my gut reaction to all of the information you just share with us is, wow, it's a lot. You guys have been really busy.
Well, I've got the 19th already slated. So.
Okay, very good. Very good. Excellent.
No one's birthday?
No. Yeah, nobody's birthday. It's mine and then my son, so we're good now for a while.
So thank you very much. I mean, it's from my perspective, wonderful information, and I'm thrilled to see it. I think, when will we see you again, and how is it tracking, and some of those kinds of things would be really helpful, particularly for parents as well, who I know there are a lot of families that are very engaged in what's going on at the junior high, and what's improving and how does that work, and we want to make sure that information's getting out. Yes,
Absolutely.
Don't hide it over there in that building. Yeah, make sure it gets out.
Okay.
Thank you.
And I can touch to some of these. Obviously, the administrative group has not finished having their conversation on staffing, and so I don't want to talk prematurely about that.
Sure.
Because once again, I'll do what I need to do with what I have, so I want to finish those conversations. Would you say that's accurate?
And to piggyback that, as you do, formally develop that stuff, definitely identify dollar amounts, whether it's the staffing, technology, training, collaborative, resources that whatever those dollar amounts are, go ahead and identify them as if, Kevin, as if there weren't, people in other buildings to sort of find, because with respect to that, especially if there's a conversation about, finding savings in other buildings, if, for instance, if they're at the elementary level, John's already referenced the notion of interventions and difficulties with some of these elementary classes going up. It may just become an economic decision with respect to the staffing as opposed to a folded-in kind of decision. So, just identify the numbers, and at that point, then at least there's a conversation about, is it something we should try to find the staff for elsewhere? Is there a negative impact to that? Or is it just dollars we should find?
Well, I think that does follow along with the lines of some of the other conversations that we will perhaps have tonight or at the next meeting, is to, when you do take and you move students as a unit district, we probably need to allocate our resources to those places. And, one thing I know that, and like Shannon said too, there's a lot of parents, that have been waiting anxiously to hear from you. And again, not that you haven't done a million things, but there's a number of things out there that can be done. And, not to go into every single detail now, but can I ask about, like the Spanish, that is just there's just a couple of things that I hear constantly from parents. Electives, less electives, choice, and foreign language. So without having 10 more inches fall tonight, is there some way that you can touch on that? Because those are the two pieces that I hear so much.
If it works out with the staffing, and what we would be looking for was for a 0.5 person to be teaching the ESL block, so that the 2 periods there, and then a Spanish class as well. And that would be just for the 8th grade, because that way they get it in 8th grade, and those students that have it, then they can go over to the high school and continue on with it. And so since we have to start somewhere, and once again, I'm trying to be respectful of the resources that we have, that if there's a place to start it makes more sense in starting it in 8th grade so that they can continue. If we started in 7th and then we couldn't do it for 8th, I took 2 years of Spanish a long time ago, and un poquito is pretty
can count
much
to
it,
10, right?
Right. So I want to make sure that there's some integrity to our program. There are some other things that we've been looking at when we look at the numbers and we look at, for instance, some textbook. When we look at textbooks in preparation for next year, because we're going to have, the largest classes, and we start talking about, well, textbooks, do we really want to make the purchases of these textbooks that are used textbooks on U.S. history, the first part of U.S. history? Do we really want to make purchases upwards of thousands of dollars in that when we know that the social studies answer to Common Core is going to be coming in the next couple of years, if we cross our fingers? Or do we want to allocate funds in a different area? And these are conversations that we're trying to make some smart choices with, not just 1 year, 2 year, or 3 years down the line, but more 5 to 10 years down the line as well, of what's best for our students and what makes fiscally the best sense, what's most responsible.
So I don't want to let go. Marie mentioned the
electives. That was the other. Yeah.
And I don't remember seeing anything about that in here anywhere, right? So I don't think I'm going to let you go on that one, because I'm curious
that's
about
okay.
that as well.
And so in order to have an intervention period, and in order to have that at the ninth period at the end of the day, and that is an intervention enrichment, because we'd be having 6 literacy blocks, some students that are in that ninth period for literacy would not be able to do an intervention then, and so that's why we have it at the first part as well. We would have let's take Miss Rugger, our art teacher, okay? She would have 6 sections of art. She would have 3 sections of, or 2 sections 6th grade, 2 sections 7th grade, 2 sections of 8th grade. And then 1 period would be her personal plan, 1 would be a lunch. And then at the end of the day, she would be having a flex period in which sometimes she'd be able to meet once a week with her team, and then other times she would be doing either an enrichment art or working with kids that need extra help, or working on literacy as well. So really what we're looking at doing is, instead of in order to have enrichment or interventions in place, there's going to be 1 PE class, 1 elective, and then either an enrichment or an intervention or a study skills, like that. And so that would be a big change to what's been done in the past, because historically there's been 2 electives and 1 PE class. Does that answer?
I think so. So the net result is 1 less elective.
That is 1 less elective, with the potential for the students that need the reteaching or the interventions. They would have that during that 9th period. For the students that needed enrichment, that's where that enrichment comes in, whether it's a reader's workshop or whether it's an enrichment in a mini lesson. Our idea is, like, when you're planning, before you get certain approvals, you only go so far before you put your heart and soul into something. And so I've already talked to quite a few teachers that are really excited. There is an exception to that. I'm sorry, I need to finish the thought. Really excited about the potential for that 9th period class, okay, and what they could be doing. There are some exceptions to that, like if I'm off the top of my head thinking of choir, there would be 3 grade level choirs, so 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade choir, and then a 7th and 8th grade problem-based learning or project-based learning class that was based on technology as well. So 2 of those, 1 for 7th, 1 for 8th grade. And then for those 7th and 8th graders that do not need an intervention, there would be swing during that 9th period class at the end of the day. And by swing, I mean swing choir. So they would be able to partake in swing choir. So if there's someone that wanted to take a different elective and take 2, there's an opportunity to get in there if they made the tryouts and made that elective class.
So, and I know we're trying to budget our time here a little bit, but.
I have all night. You guys have a lot more to do.
So there is still the potential for a student to have band and choir.
There is, but it's only for those that
Qualify?
that would be able to qualify. So for that student that made it through tryouts, and that once again, historically tryouts have been for 7th and 8th graders, that would go to them. So if they made tryouts, they would be able to have that at the end of the day. And then we're looking at the schedule and trying to make sure that there wouldn't be conflicts. So we're really being careful in how we place the different sections to alleviate those issues that we've had in the past.
So following up on what Diane said then, and I know we keep going back to this because we hear this from parents all the time.
No problem.
So let's say, like this year for registration, all of a sudden there was all this turmoil about electives. So what does a 6th grader, let's just say, what does a 6th grader have? They have one elective?
Yeah, so a 6th grader would have, they would have social studies, science, math. They would have a literacy block. So altogether that's 5 class periods, and then they would have either an intervention or an enrichment period or a study skills period. Normally it's not the first quarter of 6th grade, but usually by halfway through, towards the end of this first quarter into the second quarter, there's they start noticing the difference between elementary school and junior high, and so that extra support's needed. But it's also so they'll have that intervention or enrichment or study skills period right there at that 9th period. But then they've got that one elective, and they've got PE as well.
Okay, so they can pick, like Diane was saying, like they could pick band or choir or whatever for their first year.
Band, choir, or there would be art, industrial arts.
Okay.
And I know that I've been working with Mr. Lanigan, our industrial arts teacher, and he's got some great ideas for adding some things to his curriculum as well.
Okay, and then 7th grade, you're saying?
7th grade has, so they would have the same core subjects, and then they do have, there's a few different electives that would be brought to 7th grade for next year. So that PBL Tech, that some of the things that Mr. Faust is pitching to me that I'm looking into, and then there's also the songwriting course that would be done by Mrs. McGovern. So if you like music, but you're like me and you can only play the kazoo, that's when you bring in the songwriting course. Once again, they still have an opportunity to do an art class. They have an opportunity to do industrial arts. It all kind of depends on what their choice is, or they have band or choir as well. So it depends on what their choice is of which elective they want, of when they'll have PE. Because whenever they have their elective, that opposite, exploratory/PE period will be PE, and then that intervention, enrichment, study skills, and once again, that has a lot of different faces. There's a lot of potential with that 9th period class.
So this, for those that have been around for a long time, this tries to move away from that rotation.
Yeah,
right?
It does move away from the rotation, but it doesn't, because once again, band you're going to be doing for the entire year, okay? Choir you're going to be doing for the entire year. When you look at, you could do industrial arts or art, you can do songwriting. I'm just talking about 7th grade right now in my head. You're talking about songwriting, or you're talking about PBL Tech. Once again, we got to define that exactly. So you could have a rotation, but that rotation would be on a semester level as opposed to a quarterly level or quarterly basis.
And then for 8th grade, then following along, then 8th grade, the students can choose this language,
yes.
Spanish.
So there's
instead of band or choir?
Instead of band or choir. So that Spanish class would be a year-long class. Band would be a year-long class. Choir would be a year-long class. Those 3 would be year-long classes. But then there's also the PBL or the art class that would be a half a year as well.
So we have to pick a language or arts? I just want to make sure I understand what you just said.
Yes, and then
So we're treating language as if it were an extracurricular activity?
I mean, that's how it is at the high school.
But then art, and the idea, Shannon, because I know that Ms. Rugger and I have had conversations, and I love art. Going on the record to say I love art. But what can happen is that enrichment class, because Ms. Rugger loves having an enrichment as well, that can occur during that 9th period class. And so there can still be art projects, but it's not going to be in the way that it's been done historically. You know, we have to, and I know this is difficult to do because you have to look and see what time we have in the day, and we have to get the content areas in with the disciplines, and then we also need to look at what kind of supports do we have when students don't have it, or what kind of enrichments do we have when they do have it. How can we build them up? And we've got to basically figure out our programming from that. And so I know that there are going to be parts of this that are very popular, and there are going to be some parts that are not as much. And so we can work.
I'm just trying to figure out the continuity of programming, right? If you've had a student that plays an instrument for 6th grade and 7th grade, and suddenly they get to 8th grade, and their parent is saying, look, that language is really an important part of an education, does that student now not playing their instrument at school for that year, but then they get to the high school.
And they take Spanish as a freshman?
Well, but I mean, are you know, if they choose not to take Spanish, then when they get to the high school, they're starting the language then, which is not ideal, right? If they choose to take Spanish, they drop their instrument for a year. When they get to high school, you've lost the continuity of the music program, or choir. I mean, either one. I'm just using an instrument as an example. So if we're saying you have to pick, the first 2 years you don't offer the language, so the student can take their instrument. You know, we come out of 5th grade band with lots of excitement about instruments. I mean, we build that in 5th grade. They charge into the junior high, they take 2 years of their instrument, suddenly in their 3rd year at the junior high, their parents saying, you know what, the instrument's great, but you know, then they lose a year of their instrument, then they get to the high school and suddenly they can pick it all up again because it works at the high school where you can take a language and play an instrument. I'm just, you know, there's continuity of programming, and one of the reasons that our arts are so successful in our schools is because we have that continuity of programming. So I think we just need to be aware of, if we're making that choice, that you know, one of the departments that has had a tremendous amount of success because of the continuity, we're potentially interrupting that, like right in the middle, right? I played an instrument 5th grade, 6th grade, 7th grade. I'm not going to play it in 8th grade because my mom wants me to take Spanish. Now I'm at the high school and I'm going to play my instrument 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th grade. I mean, it just feels a little awkward. So I don't know if there's a way around it or not, but I think I want to say that out loud, that feels a little awkward to me.
Okay.
Are we still discussing the dual language? And is that only in the elementary level, or would it be through junior high as well? Is that still a topic?
Yeah, that's still a topic, but dual language, number one, it's how you grow the program. You start off at the kindergarten level, and then each subsequent year, you add a grade level to it. And then, you know, typically that's through the 5th grade, because by the end of 5th grade, students should be fluent in 2 languages, you know, English, and then whatever, as a district, you decide what the second language is, and that's driven by, you look at your student population. For our district, Spanish would make the most sense when you look at our ESL population. When students get to then junior high and high school, typically what happens then, you start to offer some of the core courses in Spanish. So the literacy course, there might be a 6th grade literacy course in Spanish, and then also in English, and then students can self-select if they want to continue with the Spanish or if they want to receive instruction in English. But typically the ESL or the dual language program is through the 5th grade.
Okay.
And then the same thing would happen at the high school as well. So math classes may be taught in Spanish versus just taught in English to accommodate those students.
I have to piggyback on what Shannon is saying, because it appears, I don't know, those of us that have tried to get a child into college and stuff, you know, I've been excited to see the new rigorous schedule at our high school to get our students ready for college. But a few years ago, we had to cut Spanish, and that was not fun. And so many people have talked about that, especially since we're in a unit district, that continuity of moving on. So if you can get some of that in your junior year, then when you go across the street, you can then partake in more of these other classes that are either an additional course that they need for colleges or something that they're really interested in. And now we're offering some wonderful things at the high school, like the Changemakers. So, I mean, I have to say, I totally agree with what Shannon is saying, is we have we have a fabulous vocal department. And if you take a student and now say, you know, we have, at the high school, we have madrigals and the concert choir. So if we now take a student who loves to sing, and the parents are going, yeah, but I'm looking at your college plan, because we all know you start looking at that in 8th grade, your high school, college, well, you need language to graduate. So in the past, those that were fortunate enough to have a language, you could take that in your junior high school and then go into the high school and carry on. I'm concerned that we're going backwards in that we take something that is very good in our district, that we excel at, and now we're making that choice on the parents, like this is the only elective you can have. I guess I thought when we were talking about the junior high and class sizes and stuff, we were going to try to deal with, you know, some of these science classes that have too many kids for the labs and things like that. And I have a strong concern that we are now saying, well, when you're in 8th grade, you will have done either, you know, band or your vocal, and that's something that many of our students like. But now we're saying, well, now you got to go take that language so you can get ahead down the road. It doesn't feel right. Do you know what am I making sense?
Yeah, I just think it's awkward, and we need to maybe, you know, look at what our options are
Right.
related to that.
And you know, I don't mean to speak for John, but again, we're faced with limited resources. And so, you know, we hear what the board would like to see occur with our buildings. We also hear what our community tells us that they'd like to see happen with our schools. And, you know, we're very well aware of, you know, some of the things that have been lost as a result of budget reductions and budget constraints and so forth. And so, you know, you're trying to meet all these needs, and I guess, and I don't mean to be callous when I say this, but sometimes, okay, in 8th grade, you know, the student will need to make a choice, you know, and they can choose Spanish or they can choose that other elective, and it's something that has occurred at the high school, you know, forever, where, you know, depending, you know, a student, for instance, who wants to go to TCD, you know, TCD is a chunk of their day. And so when they make that conscious decision to attend courses as TCD, that means that's going to limit their opportunities to take other courses, you know. And so, yeah, I guess that's the way I view it. Because if they want to continue that fine arts string, they can do that through the 8th grade, and then they'll, you know, they have the opportunity to take Spanish at the freshman year, or they would have to take kind of that year hiatus to pick up the Spanish in 8th grade, and then they continue with the music in their freshman year, you know, but.
Well, I'm going to talk about it as a parent again, forgetting that I'm sitting here, but if we're looking at our high school to try to have more AP courses, and yes, we got a wonderful grant, so what we're trying to do is make our high school more rigorous. But in the end, students need X number of credits in certain core areas. And one of those, unless that's changed, is a couple years of a language. And one of the benefits of being a unit district was to be able to have some of that at the junior high level. So I guess it's hard to hear like that we're talking about more rigor at the high school, but yet now less options at the junior high. And yes, you know, what you're saying is that, yes, that student will have to make that choice. But one of the things that you have provided for us is talking about how to stay FTE neutral, and that's looking at the bigger picture in the district. And again, talking about moving those big groups of kids over there. But this doesn't sound like that conversation. This sounds more of, I don't know, I mean, I'm just.
You know, I have to then jump onto what, because my question was going to be, is the limitation space, is it FTE? What exactly, and I mean, in a perfect world, John, what would you need? In a perfect world, and I guess that's, I don't know if that's what you come back with on the 19th, because frankly, I have to say, it absolutely pains me to hear you say, we're scraping by and we're doing the best we can with what we have, because that may be a problem. I mean, if we don't have the money budgeted at the junior high level for you to succeed and for our kids to succeed, we may have to tweak a few things. And if that's the case, you know, I guess I don't know what's driving the decisions. Is it strictly the budget? Is it the space? Is it the interest? You know, I'm not sure what it is.
And I'll keep this part very short. If you're asking me as far as why we would be going from 2 electives currently to, is that what your
Well, I
question is?
guess, you know, you gave us a number of FTEs. Would that make you whole and fluffy, or would it make you, with the new schedule, continue to scrape by with what you've got? Because I don't think that's,
No, if we, with the FTE that I've talked about, you know, with Mr. Carey, if we had that, we would be high functioning, we would have what we would need to do. I wouldn't call us fluffy, but I would call us having the resources that we need for success.
I have just a follow-up. I'm still trying to grasp the concept of the 9th period. So if a student needs interventions, let's say they don't need interventions the whole year, or they only need a couple days, are they able to float in and out of different programming that's going on during that period?
So they would be able, yeah, Joel, they would be able to move in and out of study skills. They would be able to go to enrichment as well. So there would be some flexibility in there.
Are the enrichment components in the 9th period, are they built in shorter segments, like, say, 3-week segment of?
That would be the idea. There would be more of a mini lesson approach. Once again, and I can, now that you're asking, I can continue the planning process with this. I'll move forward with it, what 9th period would be looking like. But I only went so far as 9th period was concerned.
So there's the possibility, I mean, that seems to me like you're just getting more variety in your exposure to different electives if you actually have an industrial arts component, a language component, or I don't know what you're thinking of, but music components, choral components, instrumental. I don't know what.
That is the idea, and when I had first talked about it in a school where I had previously taught, there was a period of time in which we had a certain period of weeks that were called mini units, and so depending on what that teacher was passionate about, you know, maybe they were a photographer or something along those lines, then they taught a mini unit on photography, and so there was enrichment in that, so there was exposure to that, and that was that 9th period. Those are one of my ideas those are one of our ideas, Amy and I together, of what that could look like. So I see there being a lot of potential as far as how defined it is currently. It is not. It would be a matter of, you know, polling my teachers as well and seeing what they have. Once again, readers workshop, looking at some different enrichment opportunities for them.
I'm thinking of the student who says, yeah, I want to take this elective, and they get in it, and then they're in it the whole year, and they're like, you know? And that really provides for a student who may sign up for Spanish, get into it and go, really wasn't for me, I'm not really motivated to do well, but, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Gives them more variety in electives at the end of the day.
that would be difficult because Spanish isn't during that 9th period. So once again, I'll come back on the 19th because obviously there are a lot of questions. And so I'll come back with a better picture for you and some of those numbers as well as, you know, as Dan was talking about, and have a better presentation for you.
Okay.
Your presentation was beautiful, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
John, one quick thing on your highlights of the new schedule of the draft here. If we have a priority of what you think, this is very important, this needs to be done, this is what we want to do, okay? So that we can get a better understanding of what you think, you know, that the junior high really, you know, no, we have to do this has to happen type of deal.
Okay, and I'll just mention that depending on who, parents, my PTO, parents will tell me that one thing is a priority. So there are different priorities. So you're asking from my educational
Yes.
background, what would be?
Yes, that's
okay.
what I'm asking for.
You got it.
Can I follow up on that? And another thing, like Shannon said, when you have this highlights of new schedule, is that assumed that that's for next year or no?
Yes.
Okay, so
We can make that happen for next year. If the staffing is approved,
Okay.
that we need to talk about at the admin table.
Okay, so that FTE that you're looking at would give you the ability to do all these things next year?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, and can I say one more thing before I beat a dead horse? Because I know I'm going to go home and get 100 questions. So when I think about it, again, having had a number of children kind of go through this process, if we think about, let's say, senior year, so, there's these core courses you have to take. You got to take X number of this. So it's kind of assumed that when you get to senior year that maybe you can take some things that have interested you. And so far, we have a nice curriculum in our senior year that you can advance further in something that interests you, and we have now some new rigorous courses that can be taken as well. It almost sounds like we are taking a step backwards, if you will, and correct me if I'm wrong, where we say, okay, now you get to 8th grade, and you have to make a choice, because now, according to this, the only place that language is being offered is in 8th grade. And so I guess I have to back up and ask the question, when we offered language before, since it was in the district, it qualified as part of your language for graduation. Would that be still in the case? Because I know sometimes people wanted to take a language in the junior high, and it did used to qualify as a year of language, so then maybe when they got to the high school, they could take whatever the other part was, and then move on to some of these fantastic science classes or something that we have. Do you know what I'm asking?
Right, and it would, in terms of, I think the way to answer it, I would anticipate that if a student took 8th grade Spanish, they'd have to demonstrate some proficiency, and then they'd be allowed to take Spanish 2 as a freshman. What I would have to look into, and I don't know if this is where you're going as well, is whether or not that Spanish they took in 8th grade becomes part of the high school transcript.
Right.
Part of the graduation requirement.
Part of graduation requirement.
Right, that's what I would want
My
to look
recollection is that basically at the high school, at the junior high, certainly when we were offering languages, we certainly weren't effectively having transcript credit at the high school level. It was basically just placement purpose. In other words, a kid who was particularly proficient at Spanish or French could, by virtue of taking 7th and 8th grade Spanish or French, end up taking a French 5 or Spanish
Right.
5 or an AP Spanish 5 or something like that. And you would
That's
know.
correct, yeah.
Yeah.
But I don't believe it, I
But it
don't think they got credit.
wasn't
They
like
got
credit
to jump
for
the
the
class.
junior high,
They
yeah.
did a test or a assessment, and they went from Spanish at junior high to Spanish 2 at the high school.
Right. But I'd have to look into whether or not it could become part of the,
But because of that, it sounds like, you have these electives in 6th and 7th, but then if we're only offering Spanish in the 8th grade, then that becomes, so I don't know, I'm anticipating a lot of questions.
I would assume it depends on how we offered it too, because if we offered it like we did in the past, it was a slower version. It wasn't done at as quick a
See it.
pace, and it didn't cover as much of the Spanish.
I think that's was the problem. Typically, that's the problem. The junior high time block is usually shorter than a high school, and so it's difficult for the teacher to, get through the same amount of material, and so they have to demonstrate proficiency in order to, move into that second level.
Additionally, the kids are obviously in a different spot as well, so
Right.
it was 2 years of language to equate to effectively
Right.
one year of learning at the senior high, excuse me.
Right.
What about any kind of option for any kind of summer programming that would fill some of these gaps? Foreign language, or, I don't know if the interest would be there or anything like that, but do districts do that?
It's, well, now you're going to get my bias, because your traditional summer school ends up, being 4 to 6 weeks of 4 hours a day. And, quite honestly, I think it's difficult to replicate a year in that short time frame. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend that. possibility, and this is something, as John said, believe it or not, we started in December with staffing conversations, and they've been ongoing. And usually I tell the administrators team at the end of the meeting, okay, now you guys need to sharpen your pencils because we're still not there. And so we're meeting on Thursday to continue those conversations so that on the 19th we can bring a comprehensive staffing plan to the board. And as Shannon said, make sure, and Dan pointed out, make sure we're including all those different dollars as well. But one of the things we can take back is the possibility of offering the Spanish as a quote-unquote early bird. So students who would like to take Spanish could take it, basically prior to the start of the school day, is how it would work. And that's an option there. And so it's a way to build in that and then still not eliminate an opportunity to take an elective. But the reason why we have to go back to the table then is because there's cost involved with all those types of decisions. But that's one scenario that can be looked at, Joel. I would probably suggest that before I would suggest trying to do it over summer. So.
Thank you.
Happy birthday.
Thanks, John. Happy birthday.
Thanks, John. Happy birthday. All right. And to kind of, as I mentioned, we're in this process of looking at staffing, and one of the things that again has been requested to take a look at, and again it comes from the board, it even comes from the administrative team, and it comes from our community, is taking a look at the possibility of all-day kindergarten. So the slides, I've only got a couple of slides, and it basically is paraphrasing some of the information that you have, and I can post all that information, all those documents online as well. But basically, if you remember, one of my favorite quotes is from Rod Edmonds, and every time I do kind of our overview of state testing and state report card, it's always the last slide, and I'm going to paraphrase, but basically he said, everything we know that we need to know about educating students, we already know. I mean, we already know this stuff. It's whether or not, we're going to put the resources and the time and the effort in order to make it happen. And so, the rationale, and I'll let you guys read the bullet points, but, definitely there's a strong case for the why all-day kindergarten. And, we're talking about looking at expanding our early childhood program, and Linda Cloudwater shared some thoughts with the board at an earlier meeting. And if we're looking at that population, and one of the reasons we're looking at that population is because we know the sooner we get students involved in education, formal education, the better. And especially students that are identified at risk, we know that if we can get them into an educational environment, that typically means that we'll close that achievement gap for those students, and that also, in some cases, that we may never have to go down that road of an IEP and additional support, or it may be for a minimal amount of time before they can transition and no longer need that support. Well, the same thing is true of all-day kindergarten. Right now, our students have a 2.5-hour day, and in that 2.5-hour day, about 25 minutes of it is literacy, it's reading. So you look at that, and then you look at what's coming down the road with the Common Core and everything that we're asking of our students as they transition to first grade and then through the 12th grade. And then on top of it, when you have a half-day program, what you more or less are asking for is that strong partnership with the home. Because, that 2.5-hour day we know is not enough. There has to be that support at home with parents reading with their child and doing those things. And the reality, that doesn't happen everywhere. And so as we're going down this road of professional learning communities, and one of the reasons why the junior high is looking at that 9th period time, is to build in time for additional practice and reteaching and learning, is because we're adopting this concept of no excuses. And so the fact that maybe something's not happening in the home life of a student, that's not an excuse for us why that student is not able to achieve at grade level. And so there's definitely a compelling argument for all-day kindergarten. And you know, the longer they're with us, the more we can do. All of a sudden, we go from a 25-minute literacy block to a 90-minute literacy block. I mean, imagine that, if all of our kindergarten students had a 90-minute dedicated literacy block. And as we, you know, one of the documents, and I'm not going to go into a lot of detail tonight, but the comprehensive literacy model that we've been investigating as a district, one of the things that you have to do is make that commitment to 90 minutes of literacy. I mean, that's sacred. On those days where maybe you have a shortened day or there's the holiday party or those types of things, other things can get manipulated in terms of time, but not that literacy block. That has to be sacred. And so that, again, is a compelling reason. And so there are a lot of compelling reasons for the all-day kindergarten. And again, in addition to that, when we look at students in terms of IEPs and additional support, there's the research that demonstrates that students who are involved in all-day kindergarten, it's not, you can't say 100%, that'll never happen, but it improves our chances of working with that student and getting them to grade level. So what does this look like for us as a district? What does this mean if we want to go down the road of an all-day kindergarten? Currently, we have 5 sections of half-day kindergarten, which is approximately 1.5 teachers, 1.5 FTE. And so what we would be proposing is 4 sections of full-day kindergarten, which means 4 FTE, 4 full-time teachers. And that additional cost in FTE is about $82,500. That's the additional cost. And then, in addition to that, right now, because it's yes?
Is that a salary cost or grossed up cost?
Pardon?
Is that base salary cost, or is that a grossed up total cost of?
Total. And then limited specials, because with a 2.5-hour day, you have just a, you know, rare is the opportunity to have music, library, those types of things. Well, if you went to an all-day program, we'd have to add additional specials. And so that'd be a 0.4 increase in FTE. In terms of supplies and materials, with our current half-day program, you wouldn't need any additional costs, but the estimate would be, you know, to kind of get that program up and running, about $10,000 would be budgeted, and that pretty much would be that 1-year cost. The teachers would need time to plan over the summer, develop the curriculum, and so basically budgeted at $4,300. That means 4 teachers, 5 days, 5 8-hour days of planning, and obviously they can divide up that time as they see fit. The transportation, really, there wouldn't necessarily be an increase, and the reason why is because currently we transport our kindergartners at the end of the morning session and then again at the beginning of the afternoon session. And so, you know I talk about trying to treat our kindergarten students as just 201 students. And so it would be possible to even transport them separately and really not impact the transportation budget because we're already doing those double runs. The breakfast, lunch, the $3,200, that would be personnel. When I asked Francesca about, you know, food and so forth, and she said that's kind of difficult because, you know, she said you could actually end up with a profit, you know, depending upon, and she says the feeding, you know, the serving size, so forth, is downsized for younger students, so she doesn't really see that as a significant increase. And so the total cost would be $122,000, which again, and you know, and I'm telling you this on the heels of, was it 2 board meetings ago that we had Mike Francis here? And Mike Francis from PMA was talking about projected deficits for the district. And a couple of things. One is, and I probably shouldn't say this too loudly, but the last couple of years we were projected for deficits, and we've come in with a surplus. And Kim and I have been talking, and again, you know, it's it's March, and we still have to get to June 30th, but barring any unforeseen things down the road, we're looking at, again, projected to end up with a surplus. So, and the only reason why I say that is, I think that's a compliment to Kim. I think that's a compliment to the administrative team, to our staff, that we are very conscious of what the projections are saying, and we're doing everything we can to limit that impact. And I'm not saying that, I'm not going to tell you, I'm guaranteeing you that next year, we'll be looking at a surplus. But I think the reason why you get the projections is to identify, that's the red flag that you need to be careful and you need to be diligent in order to make sure that you stay solvent. So when you see that dollar amount, I know it's kind of like, wow, we just had this presentation, and we are aware of that. And there are a couple of ways to look at this, and one is, the biggest cost of anything is always staffing. And so if we take a look at staffing in our other buildings, there's the opportunity to save some FTE or redistribute FTE in order to take care of the staffing at the for the kindergarten program. And then so basically what ends up having to be absorbed then is a much lower number of the $14,300 for the one-time cost, and then the $3,200 for the food service. And so we can do that. That's a possibility. The other way to go, another possibility, if we don't want to make those adjustments in FTE, or if we want to possibly make adjustments but because you can't spend FTE twice. You can only spend it once. The other possibility is to charge tuition, and you'd be looking at a range of $2,500 to $3,000. And the reason for the range is it depends on how we want to approach it. If we want to approach it like we do our early childhood program, where we see the benefit to the program and we see value to it, then those at-risk students, you want to make sure that they get into that program. And so, possibly those students qualify for no tuition. And then the students who come from low-income homes, there may be that floating scale so that it becomes a little bit more manageable for them. Well, because of that, if you, again, want a program that doesn't cost the district anything to run, well, then you're looking closer at that $3,000 range, because that would help to offset those reductions. At the same time, as a district, we could choose a different tuition amount that would, maybe the district is in for a little bit of it, and then the parent is in for a little bit. And so, there are different ways to look at it. But if we wanted to look at it in terms of, a non-tuition program, we can. But at the same time, if we are concerned about taking on that risk, because we don't know what the future holds as far as funding and some of those things, we can develop a tuition program. And I would argue that the all-day kindergarten, if you were to compare that to tuition that you're paying for a private school, or if you're paying daycare, those types of things for that other part of your day, I would argue that you probably are. This is pretty economical, and on top of it, this child's receiving quality education. So I think there are ways to make it happen, for our district. The other thing, again, that I mentioned was this idea, and this is something that the board would have to decide, is this idea of balancing the sections, because we're projected to have about in the neighborhood of 80 kindergarten students again for next year. And so if you had 4 sections, that would be approximately 20 students, low 20s for each section, which is a nice number to have. The reason why I would consider that is because one of the other things that we're working on is this idea of a dual language kindergarten class that would again, have Spanish, or our ESL students, I should say, and then English-speaking students, and ideally it's an all-day program, and those students receive instruction in both Spanish and English, and then we would grow that program within the district, and then students would be fluent at the end of 5th grade. Well, just the demographics of our building, if we were to do that, you very easily could see that many of our Miller students would qualify for that program because of the ESL component. And, you know, traditionally we see smaller sizes at numbers at Miller, and so it'd be difficult then to have an all-day, I guess the dual language and an all-day section, and still keep it at 4 sections. You know, that would be difficult to do. But if you treat all of our kindergarten students just as 201 students, then for kindergarten, and you could, again, as I mentioned, you could set up a couple different ways. You could have 3 sections at Miller, and the only reason why, you know, the 3 sections at Miller, number one, they would have the classroom space, and then also because I think you've heard Steve Cashman talk about the fact that Miller lends itself to younger children better than Manning, only because of the levels and everything. And then, but the other possibility would be to have 2 sections at Miller and 2 sections at Manning. And then, again, though, looking at our 201 students, and so that we can level off those class sizes, and we don't end up with an imbalance in class size. So that was very quick.
And it's obviously a lot to think about, and
Right,
so
right.
my only two comments are to the, you know, this is obviously the second time tonight we've talked about, you know, I've heard the reference to, oh, we can find the FTE in the elementary buildings. So it feels like when I hear at home, oh, I'm going to buy this because I saved money on that one, and then I hear it again, and then I hear it again. So my concern is that to the extent that you actually do go down that path and look for FTE to cover these things from other places, articulate clearly and very specifically the sections that would be impacted. So for instance, in this case where you talked about 1 at Manning and 2 at Miller, which grade levels would those be, right? And what would that do to the class sizes in those grade levels?
Mm-hmm.
And what would it do to, you know, sort of other staffing implications with respect to special?
And that will be.
So to the extent that you do that, just articulate that really clearly so people can sort of focus on that as, hey, look, there's some trade-offs that we have to make some decisions on. With respect to that, you know, there's a qualitative thing where I just, you know, I would hate to make great strides in the early childhood and kindergarten programs, only to see, you know, some different things happen at the elementary levels that make, you know, achievement in tougher classes more difficult, you know, and so there's some of that. So with respect to all of it, you know, again, I come back to bring it to dollars.
Right.
And let's figure out if we have the dollars. As an aside, with respect to the last 2 years and the current year, you know, as you know, I track our operating fund balances monthly, and you know, obviously the settlement this past fall had a catch-up payment in December and another one in January, and so I do a thing called delta to delta, which is how are we tracking against last year. And, you know, we are behind last year's pace with respect to operating fund balances, and I would expect that to grow because our you know, our salaries component has grown. So it'll be interesting to see whether or not we actually do come in that way.
Sure.
So just observation.
I'm sorry. I had a couple questions. First of all, I'm anxious to see how if we do end up reallocating the resources that we've got, how that shakes out. Because we had the conversation with regard to class sizes. So I'm assuming that by next fall, we will have more balanced class sizes, I'm assuming. And that's not really one of my questions. If someone doesn't want full-day kindergarten, they want to continue with the 2.5 hours for their child, will they have that option?
Right, you would, you still give them the option?
Okay. And then in the event that a child, say, goes to Miller for kindergarten, I don't know how the boundaries will shake out, but if say, a Manning child ends up at Miller for kindergarten, will they continue on at Miller through 5th grade, or will they go back to Manning? Do you have any idea how that will shake out?
You know, I think that's a lengthier conversation, you know, and I do have some thoughts about it. But I think part of that, though, has to be a thorough process where you're seeking input from the community and seeing what, you know, the community thoughts are regarding that as well. You know, and so I think that would be something that we would start in the spring, so that by the time we got to, you know, I would say late fall, we would have an idea of how we're going to transition that.
So if we make a determination, or you make a determination on what a salary, or I'm sorry, not a salary, but what a tuition may look like at the kindergarten level, and someone opts out of that and they only want to maintain the 2.5-hour program, half-day kindergarten, they would pay nothing, is that correct?
Well, that would be, I think, a discussion we would have. I know some districts, that's how they do it. The half-day program is at no cost, but then the extended day, there's a fee.
Okay.
And so that would be.
Because we're mandated to provide at least the half-day kindergarten, is that right?
We're actually not mandated
They're
to
not?
provide
Okay.
kindergarten, no.
Okay, good.
Okay, so she took some of my
Good to know.
questions, but are you done with that? 'Cause
I am done.
Just
Thank you.
to follow up with that, you know, those things, second only to the windows of the high school has been this buzz about all-day kindergarten. It seems like people are very excited about it. So I had that same question, would we still offer the half-day? And you had provided us with this information that, in fact, we're not mandated to do it, but obviously, especially in our district, we have such a great early childhood program. So the question is that's a good one in terms of that, and the economic factors are also well, you know, presented in terms of if you didn't have full-day kindergarten, that child goes somewhere, and for parents that have two parents working, you know, there's some cost there. So I would really like to see what would be feasible for our district, and I appreciate having the information about other districts and what they charge. Again, you never want to see anything that, you know, you lose some people. So, you know, again, talking about the using free and reduced lunch or some component of dealing with some of those people that probably need it, maybe more. But if I look at some of the things that you've laid out for us in the overall staffing concern is that, again, going down that path of what we talked about with Mr. Jonak is like we've got these big bubble classes that we're moving over there. So the nice thing about having a unit district is that you can look at where your resources are needed. So if we do follow, if we do follow the board guidelines in terms of class size, we could, and correct me if I'm wrong here, reallocate 3-point FTE to some at a kindergarten program and some at our junior high. Right. Am I correct on that? Yeah. So there's some cost neutral on that, obviously. But I guess we then go to, you know, where do we put our priority? We're expanding our early childhood program with a fantastic element. I guess my knee-jerk reaction just from this, is that I think there probably should be some fee, especially since we're not mandated to do that. Mm-hmm. Because we are certainly mandated to teach math and science and English and all those other things in the other grades where we have done our best with what we have. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I guess I see, based on all of this information, that perhaps we have the FTE in our district, and then you and the administrators can find the best place for them, which accommodates the needs that we're looking at.
Right. And we can work up different fee structures as well, you know, so that the board can see those.
Just to say out loud for the benefit of the people that don't get everything that we get, many of the districts in our regional area, a lot.
A lot,
I don't know what the
a
right
lot.
descriptor is.
Yes.
Are charging a fee that is similar in nature to the
Right,
one you're
right,
proposing.
in that range,
So that,
yeah.
I mean, straight across our regional board, there's
Right.
a significant number of examples of districts that are doing this. I just want to say that out loud for people watching or listening or who go
Right,
back to
right.
look, that what you've shared with us is that it appears to be a very, very common practice. I shared Dan's concern about, what you said, you can only use FTE once. So,
Right.
I mean, we've got some pretty significant needs up and we've got some pretty significant needs down. And, unless we're cloning, I think we're going to have some challenges.
Right.
And, looking at, we do these different little presentations, but really for us, it's all together.
Right,
And we have to
right.
look at all the staffing needs.
Right.
The fact that we're continuing to, improve the early childhood, they do need somewhere to go.
Right.
I mean, same thing along the theory of the 8th grade language, you're getting them ready to go somewhere with that language. Well, now we're making a more robust early childhood program. The notion of 2.5 hours of kindergarten does seem a little ridiculous. I mean, considering the effort and time and money and everything that we're putting into the years before kindergarten.
Right.
Yeah, so I don't think there's anybody at this table that argues the benefit of full-day kindergarten. I think this is very much a financial discussion, so.
Sure.
I think the one piece for me is that I truly believe that these front-end expenditures in early childhood, full-day kindergarten are going to pay off for us down the road a couple of years from now. So it's so hard to quantitate that at this particular point, but I really feel strongly that we'll save money by bringing on these initiatives. As far as the fee goes, I would like to see some other options. I guess because it's completely a new program, I would like to have multiple options to choose from. I do kind of feel that since it is kind of a large expenditure, that and there are these other factors that many parents probably pay for some sort of supplemental programming or whatever, that a fee is something we should look at. And I guess if we're trying to determine some sort of sliding scale or who gets a reduced rate or who gets, what kind of means testing do you apply to that so that we are ensuring that it's a fair,
Right.
it's fair and it's abides by the kind of the rules that we establish. So.
Sure. Sure.
I'm not really sure, it's been a long meeting. I'll just say I got a couple of basic concerns, and you don't have to address them tonight, but I know that, we've had a lot of large class sizes throughout the years. We've done a lot of things the last couple of years to reduce those. So I am concerned that moving some of these full-time educators is going to have one of those class sizes that suddenly benefited from the extra section to not have that extra section. I think that's a concern. I am concerned about the economics of our district. 2,500, 3,000 does seem like a reasonable number with all those other factors, but I also don't think we should create a situation where we're going to have parents who say, well, let's just go with the half-day, even if it's a much less rate or a no rate, because that's going to put more burden on the curriculum then. I mean, you're not going to add a section of half-day. You're going to try to fit those in with the regular full-day sections, right?
You'd have to look at the numbers, but.
Right. The last thing I had, and we've had a lot of discussion, obviously, in the past about grade level centers and neighborhood schools and all that. I guess I would want some assurance that a parent who wanted to go to their neighborhood school and wasn't looking for a dual language program is not going to be told that they have to go to the other school because the class sizes are too big. I think that's a reasonable request from a parent in a neighborhood. So that's all I had to say.
Can I piggyback on something that Gary was saying and that Mary Kay talked about, because when you look at a couple options that you've given to us as to where we could do this, it was kind of nice to see at least one cost, like busing might be, which would maybe even save some. So from, if we look at some of this in a nutshell and stuff, when you talk about 2 sections at Manning and 2 sections at Miller for one of the options for the new program, all-day kindergarten, okay? It's, the buses are going there. So when I look at the first suggestion, it seems like if we had a 4th section at going south, that would then create another bus route, right?
Right.
So if I look at, just comparing some things, okay? So if we did then take and had your 2 sections at Manning and 2 sections at Miller, I don't know how the administration would do that. I would also like to see assurances that the neighborhood schools stay for, let's say, the 1st grade, definitely when they then go to 1st grade, or that the families definitely stay together. Because if you've got a family that has like a 2nd grader and a 3rd grader, now they've got a kindergartner, and somehow through some lottery system, they're going to a different school, that's going to impact that family. So obviously, looking at these kind of things, I think we have, following up on what Gary said, we have certainly had this conversation many times, and we've talked about, people have responded so far that they do want neighborhood schools. So perhaps having a new program, like an all-day kindergarten at the 2 elementary schools right now, and then looking at 1st grade. You might have a situation where you've got a new family coming in, and it could be the same offer that we have made in the past.
Sure.
If your residence is in this area, and if you want to, that would still be an option for people. So I'm just.
Yep.
Do you need anything from us tonight?
No, just.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you.
All right. Well, you're up next at the superintendent's report, so.
Well, the superintendent's report is very brief. We've got our next joint committee meeting, next Tuesday, the 12th, 6:30, high school. And again, that's facilities, finance, strategic planning, and climate committee. And so hopefully our attendance has been pretty good last couple of meetings, so hopefully that will continue. That's it, yeah.
Board reports, are there any?
I'll just make it very short and sweet. I saw the play big over the weekend. It was fabulous. Congratulations to everybody involved. I had a great time.
Ditto.
Yeah, ditto.
Same.
Okay. Public comment. Okay.
Thank you for being
Very
patient.
patient.
Thank you.
I just asked somebody, are they always this long?
Well, sometimes.
Sometimes,
And if you could state your name.
Oh, sure, I got it all written down here. So, Scott Chkovics, I live in Blackhawk Heights in Clarendon Hills. I got a daughter, Ella, who's in 1st grade. I got another daughter named Lucy who's going to be in kindergarten starting next year. So obviously, I'm very interested in the all-day kindergarten. Before I even say anything, I just want to say that I'm pretty impressed with the whole meeting you guys have had tonight, aside from that TIF thing, which all important stuff, but took a while to get through that, but still valuable. I was impressed by your presentation and the thoughtful questions you guys have. And I'm reminded that I don't think you guys get paid for any of this stuff, so thank you all for doing this. Those are all good, thoughtful questions. As far as kindergarten goes, I just want to throw out a few comments. Thanks for the presentation on the options that are out there. I can tell that it's a cost. I know it's all a balance of priorities between what students, what's going to help with the achievement of scores, but also the balance for the student life and how you guys, balance that out. I can see that it's hard and there's constraints in everything we do in life, which is part of the answers that you were trying to give. But I just want to let you know from an all-day kindergarten perspective, I may be overstepping my bounds with all due respect, but it sounds like such a no-brainer to me. And when I compare it to other districts that are around here, and where I live, and the neighborhood I live in, a number of people go to private schools. And I am a big proponent of public schools. And I super proud of what's going on at Manning right now. But I will say that there are people in the neighborhood, and when I tell them that there's like a 2.5-hour day for kindergarten, they're kind of like, what? And I try to find other districts, other friends, other families that have that same option, and I can't really find them. So I know there's a cost to it. I know none of it's easy, but I just want to let you know that I think it is a really valuable asset. And I think you hit it right on the head when you said the costs we spend now are going to save us down the road. When I hear 90 minutes is what that benchmark is that's out there, and if everybody can get that, think of the continual and cumulative savings you're going to have over a career, or not a career, but a lifetime at school. I think it's very hard maybe to sit here and think about what that means, but I would be very surprised if you don't realize that over the time. So I just want to say I'm a proponent of it. You know, I'm a passive listener of the content that you guys go over, typically when it impacts me. But I got plans on sticking around in the school district, and I want it to be great, and I like what you guys are doing, and I think this is an opportunity to do the whole model, you know, small schools, big opportunities. This is an opportunity to do that. That's it.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other public comments? We don't have to vote.
No vote.
All right, then, the chair will entertain a motion to enter closed session for the purpose of discussing personnel issues, pending litigation, and student discipline.
So moved.
Second.
Roll.
I'm sorry, Marie, did you say student discipline as well?
Student discipline,
Student discipline.
yes. Okay, so what was, you got them both?
1,
Okay.
2.
And then roll call, please, Mrs. McMahon?
Mrs. Thomas?
Yes.
Mr. Charleston?
Yes.
Mrs. Hancock?
Yes.
Mrs. Charlton?
Yes.
Ms. Caparelli?
Yes.
Mr. Price?
Yes.
Mr. Armstrong?
Yes.
There will not be a vote after closed session. And just to reiterate, our next board meeting is March 19th at 7 o'clock.